just a tragic story and a tragic ending. It's hard to say if it's regrets, but is there anything different we could have done?
Nicola Kilner,
co-founder and CEO of Decium and The Ordinary. This is the unthinkable, inspirational, and tragic story of how she built a $2.2 billion empire.
I always just had this feeling that the only way to achieve financial freedom is entrepreneurship. And then I met Brandon.
Brandon Truax,
founder of Decium
and The Ordinary, one of the fastest growing skincare companies in the world.
A success story.
The minute it launched, we couldn't keep it in stock, producing 400,000 units every single day and valued at $2.2 billion US. It truly happened what felt like overnight.
And this is really where Brandon's behavior started to change.
He'd gone from someone who there was just so much warmth to just this coldness in his eyes. I was suddenly pushed out of everything. And then I got fired. Abusive emails were being sent, firing people and copying the whole company in. Everything was played out on Instagram, saying he was shutting down the entire company. The shareholders had to step in. But then things just seemed to keep spiraling. And I don't know what to do to help him.
We've got breaking news right now. The founder of Decium has died.
What would you do if the person closest to you, your best friend, your partner, the person you've built your life with, seemingly lost their sanity overnight and went from working with you to turning against you? This story is as profound as it is heartbreaking. It is as haunting as it is heroic. Of all the stories we've shared on this podcast, this is the most chilling. It is the most hard to believe. And right at the end of this conversation, there is a twist that I did not see coming, when you learn in the most tragic way that history is just repeating itself. An incredible business story, an unthinkable tragedy, and a formidable entrepreneur that stood tall when most would fall, and a genius lost to the world too soon. So pause, take a deep breath, because what comes next is not ordinary. It is certainly extraordinary. Nicola, paint a picture for me. Paint a picture for me of where you have come from.
So I think quite a traditional, because mum stayed at home, so she did do the cooking, the cleaning, and just a very caring, she's just with my children today, and it makes me so happy because I know what kind of mum she was, and just knowing that love that they're going to have. My father was very great sense of humour, always very playful, very inspiring, very charismatic, always had kind of big ideas, kind of high energy. My mum was much more reserved, more of an introvert. My dad was kind of always the people person, always kind of very busy socially. Mum was very calm. Dad would have a temper sometimes, but, nothing too much.
And at that young age, sort of like around that 10, 11, 12 age, what were your aspirations and hopes for your future? If I'd asked you, where did you think you were going to end up?
It's actually a combination of kind of almost two, what I don't think needs to be extremes anymore, but kind of I think originally would have been seen as two. One was actually a stay-at-home mum, because I think I'd seen my mum obviously just in that role. And I've always been very maternal. I'd always dreamt of having children, except I always wanted freedom. I never wanted to rely on anyone else. And I think I'd always kind of been interested in entrepreneurship, watched Dragon's Den from, quite a young age. I always just had this feeling that actually the only way to really achieve financial freedom is probably through entrepreneurship in some way. So I always kind of had this dream of almost just doing something of my 20s, kind of making all the sacrifices to build up enough freedom that then actually going on to have a family, I could make the choices to really spend my time where I wanted to.
Is that why you went and studied management studies?
Yeah, so it was actually interesting because I never knew if I wanted to go to university or not, because, I believe in university very much. If you want to become a doctor, you want to become a lawyer, there are subjects that you really need to learn. Business is one of those where it's always hard, like, do you learn that at university or do you learn that in doing? So I came across this course which was business management in company, which is quite a unique course, which was at Nottingham Trent University. So it's sponsored by different blue chip companies. So Rolls-Royce, Boots, Barclays, Tesco's, companies like that. They take on 40 people into this course. We would work 4.5 days a week for whichever company are sponsoring us. And then the other half day was kind of our study time, although obviously there was much more than that. And actually we'd go, so I chose Boots. Well, we went through interviews. Boots was my first choice and I was lucky to get there.
Boots, for anyone that doesn't know the store, if you're overseas in America or something, it's kind of like CVS or something, isn't it? Pretty much that's the equivalent. So if we just pause there then, what's your opinion now on university? When your children get to that age where they're about to make that decision, you've got 2 young children, when they get to 18 years old, and if they said, Mummy, I want to be an entrepreneur like you, what advice would you give them based on your experience?
So I actually would always probably recommend doing a few years in a corporate, because I have to say at Boots, I learned so much. You know, you learn the things that they do really well. You learn the things that they do not necessarily wrong, but just the drawbacks of being such a big organisation. So I think, you know, more than going to university, like the 2 placement years I did at Boots, I learned incredibly so much. And depending on the kind of person you are, you know, if you go to a big corporate, it's so difficult to impact the culture there because there's just so many people, there's so much history. And if you are someone who's kind of got this strong drive to make a change, then, you know, entrepreneurship, I think, is just an incredible area. And even if it's not your idea, but going to join a startup is just incredible energy. And it just would always be what I would recommend.
At that point, if there was a key skill or a key set of skills that you took from your time working in a corporate at Boots that then proved to be incredibly valuable as you went on, what were those skills?
So when I graduated, I then stayed on and I was an assistant buyer to begin with, and then I got promoted to be a buying manager for them, which was really around relationships. It was about collaboration. It was about looking around the world, seeing new technologies, finding the innovation, new brands, and then really hand-holding those, which mainly were entrepreneurs, to come into Boots to actually show them, look, this is how we could launch. We had a stand, it was called Latest Finds. We would launch a new innovation for a period of 3 months as a trial to see if it would work. Would Boots consumers like this? If it did, they would get a listing with Boots kind of long term. And that just really suited my skill set because it was a very entrepreneurial role. Because actually, you know, I very much guided them with PR agencies and actually how to build the plan. And, we used to have this saying of like launch and love, because actually it's one thing to get a listing at Boots. It's another thing for your product to actually be picked and taken off the shelf. Like the listing is just the first thing, you have to drive consumers. You have to have that entire plan. And I think it was just a really good way of actually learning from working with supply chain, working with finance, doing the checks, with legal. Can we do this? What can we say? It was a really good sense of actually working with so many different departments and actually starting to understand, I think, consumer goods, learning demand, learning how to create it. So I feel like that role was created, which really just suited my skill set incredibly well. And I'm very fortunate for that. And then that's also how I met Brandon. So actually it had a huge impact in obviously my next stage too.
And Brandon was a business you were maybe... He had a business you were maybe looking at?
Yeah, so he was with his previous business, which was called Indeed Labs. And we launched a couple of their products through this program, Latest Finds. So I'd worked with him and I remember, and actually this sounds alien now, so many years ago, but you couldn't check your emails when you left the office. So often every morning I'd come in and I was dealing with a lot of international entrepreneurs. So I'd always come into like an inbox full of emails. I always remember like looking for his name because his email was always so full of energy. He always signed it off, smiles, Brandon, just someone whose positivity, his passion just kind of really shone through, that I'd always go straight to his emails, kind of open it. And, the launches that we did with Brandon and Indeed Labs were some of the most successful we did through the innovation program. And he was just, when he used to come to the Boots head office in Nottingham, it was bouncing off the walls with kind of this infectious energy. And I remember just from the day I met him thinking, gosh, I always want this person in my life, because he just had this aurora and just someone who you knew wanted to actually also make the world a better place and kind of really cared about doing good and doing things differently.
And at some point you start having a conversation with him privately about launching a business, your own business, and then he's launching his business, right?
Yeah, so I remember he suddenly left Indeed Labs. Now, Indeed Labs, he founded it. It was a rocket ship. It was kind of doing super well. And I remember getting this message from him that he left and just being like shocked, as in like, what has happened? So then when he was next in London, I met up with him. And obviously he told me about his reasons for leaving. He was going to do this next thing. And I'd always kind of had this viewpoint of wanting to do my own business. And ever since I worked in beauty, I found that, I always had friends, family, everyone asking, what's the best mascara? What's the best foundation? And just how we'd go to TripAdvisor, to look at kind of ratings and reviews for restaurants and hotels. I wanted to create the same thing for beauty that actually ranked the products. So I told Brandon my idea and said, I want to do this. What do you think? Do you have any advice? He told me he wanted to start something called Deciem, which was from the Latin word for the number 10. It wasn't designed to be a beauty engine at that time. There was a beauty concept, but there was a technology concept, there was a food concept, so kind of just lots of different ideas generating, but with this viewpoint of doing 10 things at once. So we said, why don't you come in, help do Deciem with me, and I'll help do the beauty. We went on to call it Beauty Wise with you. So then obviously I made the decision to leave Boots, which obviously I was at the age of 23, 24. And I remember telling mum, and everyone's like, oh, you're in a really good business, you've got a good, you're already achieving things. But I just knew that I wasn't meant to be there forever. So I left 10 years ago, and then it was the start of Deciem.
I've got to say, this idea of doing 10 brands at once seems like it's counterintuitive to anything you might read in a business book that speaks to the importance of focus. Was there any sense in that, in your view? So
in actually our office in Melbourne, we used to have on the wall, focus is overrated, because everyone does tell you not to do 10 things at once. And actually, there were so many benefits to doing 10 things at once. So first of all, it was this viewpoint of trying to create this ecosystem of, how do we have our own manufacturing, do our own comms in-house? Because, and again, it takes funds to set up that ecosystem. But also, so many entrepreneurs, which I understand why they're in this situation, but so many entrepreneurs have to outsource everything. They go to the PR agency, they go to a lab, they go to someone to do your R&D. And then you're really just coordinating all of those efforts rather than, so it was a privilege we could build this whole ecosystem, because then at the table, everyone's sat there, everyone's generating ideas. And again, if I think around doing comms in-house, it's a lot for one brand to pay, but if you've got 10 brands, suddenly you can look at it as 10% of everyone's salary. If I'm flying to Australia to meet a buyer, well, do I want to present one brand or do I present 10 brands? And also just this, area of, you don't know what's going to, until if you're in consumer brand, until it starts selling, you don't really know what's going to be. You can do all the research and all the insights in the world. Until something gets traction, you don't really know what's going to work. So it also just set up this incredible structure that we could fail. We could keep trying things. We could fail relatively cheaply, quickly, and kind of start the next thing.
What's the downside, though, of doing 10 brands?
So I'd say the downside in the later years is because The Ordinary has become such a huge success. When The Ordinary took off, the other brands got pushed aside, because it's very difficult if you have one brand that's really driving such a huge portion of your revenues. When everyone is, facing high workload, that always gets prioritized. So then you end up ignoring the other brands versus if they had a dedicated team. And it's something now we want to actually restart our incubator engine. And actually, the only way we can do that is by having a dedicated team to that. So there are downsides. I think the other thing that made a huge difference for us, because we didn't have much money as a startup and we obviously wanted to hire all of these people, we couldn't afford experience. So everyone who was hired was pretty much straight out of university, straight out of college, just applied for their first job. And actually that meant no one really had preconditioned ideas about the beauty industry, about the way things should be. Everyone was approaching it just with almost a very practical viewpoint. And I think that made a big difference too, with actually this, how do we think differently? How do we do what others aren't doing? It was almost never something that had to be discussed because people hadn't worked for the other conglomerates for all the years.
Soon after you become co-CEOs with Brandon.
Yeah.
I always think about co-founder relationships and, people being yin and yang and what the kind of right balance is for co-founders. In your case, the way that you came together was quite unique. It wasn't necessarily, there wasn't an initial interest in being co-founders. You were both going to do two separate things. You then kind of got drawn towards each other. If I put your personality on this side and Brandon's here, what are the differences? How are they complementary but also uncomplimentary?
So Brandon was eccentric.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
He was, I'd say we were both very passionate. He was a lot more eccentric and I'm a lot more calm. I think would be a big difference. But I guess also from a skill set, he was so into he was a genius when it came to science. He was a tech person originally. So he came from things with he didn't understand grey. It was black and white. And actually that was quite a good way to actually approach the science, I think, behind beauty products. He was at times short-tempered. I'd be the kind of smoothing things out and he would kind of be a little bit more hot-headed. But again, I think it was, a startup culture is not for everyone, but for me, those first few years were incredible. But he also just had this amazing way of making things fun. Like when we would plan trips to go on meetings, he would be prioritizing which restaurants we were going to, where's got the best ice cream, what are we going to go and do here? And actually the work was something that came alongside it. He also had this, he had this philosophy. He wanted to build a family. He'd had, a troubled upbringing. I think he'd always, he'd actually had this pattern, I think, of always leaving a business when it kind of just went on the verge of success. Deciem was his fourth business. He had a tech business and he had two beauty businesses, Uoka, then Indeed, before Deciem. And each time what hurt him was actually leaving the relationships and the people behind. So his viewpoint of Deciem was actually, how do we build a family, like a work family? But I think it was never work. And I think that's what so many of us felt. Weekends, evenings, like we wanted to be doing Deciem because we were all friends. We were all eating together. We were going to Niagara Falls on the weekend. We were going to a theme park in Toronto. Like we were just having fun whilst we were doing everything.
The part you said about he wanted to build a family because he had a sort of troubled upbringing. I'm trying to understand there how his upbringing, you believe, shaped his perspective on how you assemble a company. It sounds there like he was building the family he might not have had, or there's clearly some attachment challenges there if he wants to sell the brands but not the people.
Yeah.
And again, the heartbreak associated with leaving these companies was all about losing relationships. A lot of that speaks to something that must have happened early.
Yeah, so I think it was around building a family of, he never wanted anyone to leave him. And he wanted Deciem to be a place of belonging. And actually, even now we have belonging as our kind of North Star. Like the most important thing anyone in our team should feel is that they belong at Deciem. Whoever they are, whatever they believe in, like there is a place for them at Deciem. And I think that really comes from this like sense of family. And I think, and again, like I even look at my husband's world, I do think startups, because you're working in a very intense environment, it does build relationships far deeper than, I ever experienced at Boots and that I think would exist in corporates. So this sense of family, I think, we would have taken a bullet for each other. And I think even now, like within Deciem, we're 1,500 people now, but we still have so many of those early team members.
Sounds like a cult.
It is, but actually a very happy
You
one.
can't say that, yeah. This morning I did a talk and I said, listen, I'm going to say something here which might get me in trouble. I'm like, you've got to scale from a cult. I was like, I always have to disclaimer it and explain cults are really bad, of course, and they manipulate people. But this is not what I mean. It's that sense of dedication. We're all in this together. Inspirational founder, mission you all believe in, and you believe you're right regardless of what the outside world says. You're on a mission. You're sleeping under the table, you know.
Yeah. Well, they always say that, you know, you can like complain about your parents, but if anyone else says a bad word about your parent, you're like, no, like even if they're saying the same thing you've said. And Decium's like that, you know, like you can complain, like internally, like maybe there's not this process, but if anyone says a bad word, you come straight to the defense. But I think there was just so much love and passion. And again, Brandon cared for all of us. Like he had so much love that you gave it back. And that's where it was so difficult, you know, when we went through the unthinkable and things became so difficult, because it wasn't a colleague. Like you've just lived this incredible journey of us all traveling together, building something so special, like just such a sense of we're all in this together. Like even when times are hard, like we've got each other's backs and things may not work out, but actually let's just have fun, let's learn things, and let's just keep trying. Like let's never be afraid to fail, and let's just do it together.
People hear that and they see the outcome. So everything you've described there is the outcome. You've got this great culture, people are dedicated, they're loyal, they're on this mission. What people will be thinking, because they'll be sat in their offices now working somewhere, or they'll be building a company of their own. In fact, this young lady came up to me this morning and asked me this question when I was doing this talk. She said, I've got this small team and I'm trying to create exactly what you've described. That kind of real dedicated kind of cult-like company culture where everyone's in it. How does one create it? It's actually quite difficult to explain how it comes together, because in many cases, from what I've observed, it's not necessarily intentional. I.e., it wasn't like a strategic, drawn up plan to make people really care. It was quite a natural thing that resulted in that sort of deep sense of care from the team members. I'll offer up one thing, which you said, which I thought was spot on, which people often overlook, which is fun. Yeah. People think, well, we'll give perks and this, but it's all the things that happen outside of the work that seem to do most of the work in creating that cult.
And you come up with the best ideas when you're doing something on the weekend and you're not in that kind of Monday to Friday 9 till 5 zone. That's when that creativity, I think, happens. And I think, you know, people spend so long in the workplace, and that's why it's so important that actually people enjoy coming in. The one thing that I say, like, is definitely been like a purposeful shift is I look back at early startup culture, and I don't know if it's always kind. There's very high expectations. And again, if you're working, you know, I'm calm. Brandon is very high passion, high expectations. You know, there's this, people feel like they need to work on the weekends and the evenings. And is that healthy? Even though actually it's trying to get that balance. And I think it'd be interesting, you know, and again, with my husband, who's a different stage of startup, I always just find it interesting around, like, I think especially in today's world, like we're so much more aware about mental health and burnout, and actually how to be much more respectful of balance, which I don't know if we necessarily had back then. But equally, I feel like, again, we were pretty much a bunch of young 20-year-olds, with Brandon, you know, being a little bit older, who were all just happy and loved what we were doing. And when you start creating things and you start to see the results of your work, then that drives you even further. And then that makes it even more exciting, because you know, you can see what you're achieving is actually meaning something.
Do you think you could have achieved the success with Deciem and The Ordinary and the other brands if you didn't have that lack of balance and early cult-like culture?
No. And again, like I think, you know, in the early days, everyone's round the same table. You've got Predvi who's making formulations, Dion who's doing comms and brand, like everyone's just there talking, coming up with ideas. And that collaboration is so special. And, you know, you're in WhatsApp groups and you're like, have you seen this? Let's do this. And also I think, you know, the other thing in the early days, being agile is so important. And everyone was okay. You could work on something and the next day there'd be a change of decision, or someone had a different view and you're like, oh, actually, let's go in that direction now. That gets harder, I think, as you get bigger, and actually there are many more teams and there's more people involved.
So that's interesting. I have to say I agree. With any business I've ever been in, I look back at those first sort of 10, 20 people and the way they behaved, and that's ultimately what we scaled. But it's that energy, enthusiasm that got us from like 0 to 1. Does that therefore mean that there's a certain type of person you should be looking to hire at that early phase that maybe can afford to have more of an unbalanced life?
I think it is, you need someone who's prepared to wear every hat. So in our early days, we would say yes to, like, we'd get an order from Boots. If we didn't think we could fulfill it, we would say yes and we'd figure it out afterwards. And that would often mean Brandon, myself, like all of the, whoever was working in the office at the time, we'd go and work in the factory. We would pull all-nighters making the products. And, you know, back then, like I remember with hand chemistry, we had like a hand crimping machine. Like we'd be in, but it didn't seal that well. And about 1 in 10 actually exploded if you squeezed too hard. So we'd be like there at night, like making them, squeezing them, like, okay, they can pass. So you have to have people that are prepared to get on production line, to pack the boxes. And again, like, you know, even later on, like when it was, you know, times around November, Black Friday, which, you know, more recently we've boycotted and we have Slowember, our campaign. But those periods where it's busy, everyone gets into the warehouses and they help ship the products out. So I think the ability to wear whichever hat is needed for you at that moment is the most important skill set.
What do you think of this concept of work-life balance? You know, I had someone on the podcast the other day, and it's called Alex Hormozi, and he was saying that he was like, people need to stop having a conversation around work-life balance because it kind of assumes that there is such a thing as a universal balance that we should all be striking. Whereas as you described it, you were happy. And your life might have been slightly one-dimensional, but but you were happy. And surely that happiness is the most important thing. And Alex Hormozi says, listen, I do 2 things. I work and I play video games. That's it. And I'm happy. So stop telling me to do work-life balance. I'm happy.
Yeah. 100% agree. And I think, you know, it comes down to what's the right balance to you, and it changes at different periods of your life. So I was in my 20s, I was fine. I might maybe sacrifice nights out and kind of doing other things, but I was so happy being traveling all the time, being in this kind of Decium bubble, creating all of this magic. And to me, that's such a powerful concept around how do we achieve balance at different periods of your life. We're all going to have periods where we can be working every hour and we love it. And actually it's our work, but also it's our hobby. It's our downtime because we just love it so much. Then you have another period of your life where, you know, maybe you have an elderly parent that needs your support. Maybe you're going through some challenges. You've got young children. How do we step up and support each other to say, do you know what? I've got you here. You do this bit, I'll cover those bits for you, because in another few years, maybe it switches around. And again, that's something that I think is so unique to when we say a family culture. That to me is an example of kindness that I think really actually demonstrates it.
There has been a debate, hasn't there, about the use of the word family in the corporate world. People think it means, it kind of asserts that there's a lack of boundaries. And these are not, you know, Netflix's whole culture document, which is like, we're not a family, we're a high performance team. And I think I have struggled to figure out where I sit on it, because there are many elements of the family culture that I always want in my businesses. That sort of care, that going above and beyond, the way, you know, a deeper sense of relationship that's non-transactional. And then also, on the other hand, you don't fire your family. You know, so it's, what is that balance between family and high performance team?
So for me, family is about belonging,
Okay.
and everyone just really feeling like they have a safe place to be and that they are loved. I think kindness sometimes is mistaken for weakness. And also I think there's a conflict between the words being kind and being nice. Being nice is kind but can be superficial. You know, you see a stranger on the street, you're like, hi, how are you? You know, you open the door. It's nice, but do you truly mean like, how are you? Or are you just kind of passing it? If someone's not performing at work, it's not necessarily a nice thing to have that conversation with them. But it is the kind thing, because if your intention is to help them, and the help may be, this is maybe a different role that we see in the company, which we think you're more suited for. It may be that we think you need this coaching, this training to get to where you need to be. And it may be that, look, you're in this role, but we're not seeing the delivery here. We actually think the better option for you is outside. And now when we've done terminations, you know, we've done things around like, how do we do counseling, where actually it helps someone to look for another career, depending on kind of what role it is and the reasons why we're leaving. Because to me, then that's a kinder way. We're actually trying to help that person. And the other thing, you know, our business, we were like kind of this, and we like had a rocket ship, kind of boomed, and then we came to a dimp just after kind of COVID. It hit me when I realized if our numbers don't pick up again, we're going to have to let people go, because actually that is the consequence of business. Like you're there to kind of do many things, but ultimately like one factor of that is to be a business and to make money. And if you start to not hit your numbers, ultimately like you can't lose money for long. People will start to say you have to save money. Where does that come from? Headcount. And I think that then hit me again that, okay, we have to perform. So to be kind to everyone, we have to be a performing team. So again, I think you can be high performing, but by being kind, I think you can make everyone feel safe and trusted. That again, if you have to make the hard decision, you're going to do it in the way to be as kind as possible and actually, you know, have the action to try and help.
Quick one before we get back to this episode. Just give me 30 seconds of your time. 2 things I wanted to say. The first thing is a huge thank you for listening and tuning into the show week after week. It means the world to all of us. And this really is a dream that we absolutely never had and couldn't have imagined getting to this place. But secondly, it's a dream where we feel like we're only just getting started. And if you enjoy what we do here, please join the 24% of people who watch this channel regularly and have hit that subscribe button. It means more than I can say. And if you hit that subscribe button, here's a promise I'm going to make to you. I'm going to do everything in my power to make this show as good as I can now and into the future. We're going to deliver the guests that you want me to speak to, and we're going to continue to keep doing all of the things you love about this show. Thank you. Thank you so much. Back to the episode. I heard you say something, which was that you're the least qualified CEO ever.
Yep.
You don't sound like the least qualified CEO ever. I guess you've been through some shit, so.
I definitely am. And again, you know, you have to, I was there from the beginning, and being someone who can, you know, play a leader for an organization of 10 people, 20 people, 100 people is a very different skill set. To, you know, we are 1,500 people. We now have a majority ownership from SA Lauder Companies, who are a public company. Our whole world has changed. And rightly so, because being a much bigger organization, we have to be far more organized and planning. And I wouldn't say those are necessarily my skill sets. And again, when, you know, the kind of dip I mentioned was a very difficult period, because we'd just been on this rocket ship of, you know, even when things were difficult, the one thing that we were always ahead of budget, targets, whatever anyone set for us. We always were just overachieving, which feels incredible when you're in business. Like if you hit numbers, then everything else just falls into place. And I remember like you lose confidence. And I remember actually saying to Stefan, who we report into at ELC, who's like an incredible person. But each time when I used to say, oh, like, you know, this is not going right. And I said, like, I'll resign. Like, I'm not the person. But I was like, I need help. Like, I was like, I can't do this. Like, I'm not the CEO who understands numbers in the right way, who plans. Like, I changed my mind. And again, like, you think about all the things as a startup, you can do things quickly. You can change. If you change your mind on a decision when you now have many more people working on it, you demotivate people. You become... Chaos is fun in a startup. In a large organization, chaos can become demotivating. So then I was very fortunate that we did bring in a very incredible general manager who joined us about a year ago. And he has had such a transformation on the company, because he can't believe just the basics we didn't have in place. And because we'd grown so quickly, and it's now to get that balance between, you know, there's areas we don't want any experience but Decium's when it comes to like brand and innovation, our values, things that we are so passionate about. When it comes to supply chain and scaling and new markets, we need experience. So actually having the GM come in that actually could kind of take control of those and then actually allow me to focus on the areas which I'm much more passionate about, which is the brand area, our people, culture, belonging, social impact. It's just made a huge difference to the business.
So 2 things there. You offering up your essentially resignation from your role when things were a little bit tricky. It's giving me imposter syndrome.
I like to think more just like a realist of...
Have you ever had imposter syndrome? Because, you know, saying this quote here about being the least qualified CEO ever, what is...
From a traditional perspective. For example, if I went now to, you know, another company with revenues nearing $1 billion a year with 1,500 employees, I wouldn't be a good CEO. Mm-hmm. I think I could be a good people person. I think I could help on values, on brand. Now, obviously, there's an argument of like a modern CEO, and I think especially there's no one more qualified for DECIEM than me because of the history. But when I think about just the pure metrics and the size of the business, it needed someone with some more experience. And again, I'm a big believer on, you know, anyone who thinks they're the expert at everything, they're not. And I think I'm a good person at relationships and hopefully bringing people on for the journey, hopefully people feeling how appreciative and truly grateful I am that they choose to kind of be at DECIEM and give their all every day. But there are many areas that I'm not good at all. And actually having trusted people to support that is amazing. And I always do think myself more, you know, it's kind of like the conductor of an orchestra, like being aware, except I'm not very organized. So the bigger you get, then suddenly you do need someone that maybe has got more technical skills.
It's interesting because when I asked that question about the imposter syndrome thing, I immediately reflected upon it. And I thought, it's funny how imposter syndrome and self-awareness can sound very, very similar. And that's, in fact, from speaking to some of your team, one of the things they repeatedly said to us was about your self-awareness. And I even reflect going back early to your time at Boots where you were contemplating becoming a buyer. And the first thing you're doing there is saying, does that suit my skill set and what makes me happy? Mm-hmm. I mean, your team said it. They said your quote is that she isn't afraid to tell you, and she instinctively knows what her strengths and weaknesses are.
But I think it's the only way to be authentic. You know, trying to be something that you're not, or something that doesn't make you happy is not really good for anyone. And I actually think like authenticity in today's world, I think is a value that is one of the most important, because otherwise you get cooled out. It'd be crazy for me to say that I'm good at the finance piece. I'm not. It's not a strength. But we have an incredible VP of finance. We've got an incredible general manager that truly understands it. So I think actually just playing to your strengths and allowing others to play to their strengths is actually what brings that authenticity.
I should probably read this. Your team said she delegates a lot and very well. She very instinctively knows her strengths and her weaknesses. She isn't afraid to bring on knowledge and talent for those weaknesses. Her team says she's incredibly self-aware, and also she is literally a ray of sunshine. How much did you pay Jenny in marketing? I'm joking.
It was kind.
2017, you launched The Ordinary in 2016?
Yeah, at the end of 2016.
At the end of 2016. Mm. And then 2017 is The Ordinary's breakout year.
Yeah.
Breakout year, how do you quantify that? Give us an idea.
The minute it launched, we couldn't keep it in stock. It was, and again, we'd come up, so The Ordinary was the 11th brand that we came up with a concept for.
Wait, that violates the name.
I know.
It was meant to be 10.
But we don't focus, so we can change our mind.
Wow.
So we kept going, and...
What's the Latin word for 11?
I don't know, maybe a company name change. With The Ordinary, I don't think we ever thought we never dreamt it would become what it's become today. We launched The Ordinary out of frustration that there wasn't enough transparency in the world of skincare. And, you know, we took inspiration from the world of pharmacy. If you have a headache, you can go into a pharmacy, you buy paracetamol, you're going to be paying, 50p to £3. It's a very small window. No one can sell you paracetamol for £100 because you know the ingredient, you know the milligram. The trust is there because the transparency has been in that industry. That didn't exist in the world of skincare, which meant that if you walked into a beauty hall to pick a skincare product, you may see actually a relatively similar formula being sold for £10, being sold for £100, and actually not really understanding what's the difference. Is it the marketing you're paying for? We kind of have this assumption, does like paying more mean more? But if you go into Boots and you see a new £100 painkiller, Are you going to trust it, or are you just going to take the ingredient that's safe and effective and trusted? And I think the reason we were feeling frustrated was because for Neod, we were really using brand new technologies that were very expensive and no one else was using these. It was kind of true innovation. So we said, well, actually, let's take this approach of people, because again, some of the ingredients we use in The Ordinary, they may have been around for decades. That's not a bad thing. If something's been around for a long time, there's so much research done, there's so much safety. And again, just like paracetamol, aspirin, we don't always need new if you've actually found a solution that has incredible effects. We presented the concept of The Ordinary to two significant retailers, two of our big partners now, who both said no to launching the brand. And this was when we were kind of still at concept stage before we'd even produce the first product. They said it was too confusing, white boxes will collect dust, you need to just rename the products to be anti-aging serum, radiance serum, effectively just what everyone else looked like in the industry. And because we had this umbrella and we had different brands, it gave us the confidence to say no, because we were doing okay for ourselves. Like, we could cover everyone's payroll. We kind of had traction with some of the other brands, but we said, no, let's follow our gut, which again, it's a privilege to be able to say that, because I know for so many entrepreneurs, cash flow is a killer, and it can be so difficult to say no to a listing that could be worth significant money. But we said, actually, no, we really believe that actually this transparency is what's missing in the beauty industry. So, The Ordinary launched, and it just honestly was a rocket ship that even today, and throughout our VP of supply chain has, we're producing 400,000 units every single day at the moment in our manufacturing in Toronto. We still have retailers. If you go into Boots, you'll still see lots of out of stocks on the shelf. Like, we still struggle to keep up with demand 6 years later since we launched the brand. And that has been, it's just been an incredible story. But I mean, we look back at 2017, we knew we needed kind of more money to scale. So we started looking for investment.
Which is how many months after launch?
The Ordinary was like 3 months old. Deciem was 4 years old. And again, we were doing okay. Like, we had some success stories, not anywhere near the scale of kind of where The Ordinary went to. We met with different private equity firms. There was like another huge conglomerate who we had lots of meetings with. And we ended up meeting with Estee Lauder companies in April. And it was 8 weeks from our very first meeting to the deal being signed, which was due diligence, negotiations, everything. It was, especially for a corporate with a board, a public company, it was just this huge energy from the moment they came to Toronto, the kind of M&A team. Then they were like, we need you to come to New York. We want you to meet Leonard. We want to meet you Fabrizio, our CEO. We want you to kind of meet this team. And I remember seeing Fabrizio, the CEO, who I have a huge amount of respect and admiration for. And the deal was done within like 30 minutes of meeting, because they just saw this, I think, the energy, particularly from Brandon. Like, Brandon and I were in the room, like just this creativity, this passion. And The Ordinary was just starting to kind of create these kind of rumbles. And I think they, ultimately they believed in the concept. They believed in what we wanted to do. So the deal signed in June. They became a minority investor. They took 29% of the company. And actually, with Deciem today, we have had more time with ELC than without ELC.
ELC?
Estee Lauder companies.
Okay.
When acquisitions happen, I think companies go from 0 to 100%. We're at 70. They own 76% now of Deciem, and it will go to 100% next summer. And actually, that process will have been 7 years, which actually is one, I think, quite forward. I haven't seen many deals like that done, I think, between kind of a startup and a larger company. But actually, it's just been this amazing different chapters of us both getting to know each other, learning each other's strengths. I think having a lot of respect for, where we need help and where we kind of need to be left alone. So actually, it's just been this really nice journey. And, Deciem, we're in our 10th year this year. And 6 years of those, we've had the partnership of Estee Lauder companies.
29% they took. And it's rumoured the valuation was about 1.5 billion.
In the 2021 investment.
Okay, right.
Yeah, it was, I think, valued at $2.2 billion US dollars.
And at that early stage, I'm trying to figure out, 4 years into Deciem, Estee Lauder put some money in. What was the valuation at that point when they took the 29%?
It had been about 160 million.
Okay, Jesus. Okay, super interesting. I mean, it's a very quick trajectory relative to most companies in that space to achieve those valuations in such a space of time. We move on then from 2017 to 2018. And this is really where Brandon's behavior started to change.
It truly happened what felt like overnight. So at the end of 2017, so we closed the investment in the summer. And again, The Ordinary, at the end of 2017, it's a year old. It's having this incredible, just people are warming to it. People are loving the concept. You know, I always think The Ordinary is like a community brand because it really was spread through word of mouth endorsements. And I remember my husband and I, we went to New Zealand and Australia for kind of the Christmas break. And then I remember getting this call from Brandon saying, you know, you need to go straight to the airport with he was like, have you got your passport? I said, yes. He said, you go straight to the airport now, book a first class flight, come straight to Toronto on the next flight, turn your phone off, turn your emails. He was just like, calm down, let's be relaxed, but you need to come immediately.
So he didn't tell you why?
No, but I could just sense it was an entirely different person I was speaking to.
All of a sudden?
Over that break in the holidays. I mean, the flight from Australia to Toronto, I think I was on the plane, you know, traveling for about 20 hours. I cried the entire way because I knew something really bad was happening. And I guess to just kind of towards the end of 2017, and again, I have to say Brandon is someone who he would have like one drink in the month. Like he barely drank. As far as I'm aware, you know, we spent so much time together, like wouldn't do drugs, was just he was high on energy and happy as just drinking Diet Coke and eating fries with ketchup type person. Towards the end of 2017, he'd become intrigued, I think, by magic mushrooms and just kind of this idea of, you know, can you access different parts of your brain? And again, this was just something like in Amsterdam where it's legal and it's kind of just this, almost just this inquisitive, actually, how does the mind work? And I knew he'd planned to go to Amsterdam over New Year to kind of experiment with some of his learnings on kind of mushrooms and in different dosages. And I'm someone who's quite anti-drugs. Like I've always been kind of, I like to be well behaved. I don't like to kind of break any rules in those senses. And I just had this awful feeling. And I came back to Toronto and he summoned, you know, around 10 of us to have this meeting in the distillery store, which was one of our Deciem stores in Toronto that we closed for the day. And everything had changed. And it was just like talking to a stranger. He had this like coldness in his eyes. And he'd gone from someone who, you know, the second you see him, there'd be hugs. There was just so much warmth. You know, all of his emails would have hearts on. It was just kind of all of this love in messages and kind of just being, to just this almost kind of zoned out cold person that suddenly almost felt like kind of just had this like, it's like he didn't understand. There was no understanding anymore between him and any of us. He spoke around things where, you know, we're too caught up now in the concept of time. So, for example, he said to me like the next day when, you know, we'd meet for coffee and, you know, our routine for the previous 4 years has been, he'd text me, he'd be like, I'll pick you up at 7 a.m. We'd go to a coffee shop, we'd get, you know, breakfast and head to the office. And he suddenly was like, there's no time anymore. I'm going to meet you in the coffee shop tomorrow, but we don't need to tell each other a time. We'll just be there when we're supposed to be there. And I remember finding it really hard because he truly is such a genius and a visionary. And this has happened so quickly. And I remember like ringing Sean and saying like, does he have a point? Like, are we too caught up in time? Like, is this just like, are we taking things the wrong way? So I had a lot of confusion just around like, how can something change so quickly? And again, this is someone who, you know, over the 4 or 5 years of being like insanely close to him, you know, I was going to Toronto at this point for like 3 weeks out of the month, and we'd have every dinner together, breakfast together, lunch together, every weekend together. And never seeing any episodes of mental health or anything changing. So suddenly have this drastic change of someone you loved, but someone suddenly who feels like he's completely closing the door to you and kind of pushing you out. This was an indifferent person who was angry, shouting, crying, scary. It was suddenly very cold to everyone. And then, so where everyone's very confused, very upset. And then there's business things that start to happen that make no sense, that are actually quite mean. You know, cancelling a brand on Instagram, a big partnership we had done with someone, cancelling a retailer on Instagram.
He went on Instagram and told them, said to your following on Instagram that
this brand's no longer going to exist. So
before telling them?
Yeah. So we'd spent all of this time with Dr. Esho building this brand.
I know Dr. Esho.
Yeah. And then it cancelled. Like, T-John found out on Instagram with everyone else that this brand that he'd put all this passion and energy in was ended. Retailers were ended. It was just horrible. So I did challenge him. And what happened when I challenged him was I got a meanest response around how I just don't understand him of all the people I should understand.
Gaslighting.
And just, yeah, and but like you look back and like nothing was making any sense. And then I got fired because again, and he wasn't technically allowed to, like, you know, you need board approval and all of these things, but there was no rational actions at this time. So this just accelerated so quickly. And then it's so difficult because then anyone who's trying to help gets pushed out. So then everyone's, and again, like in the background, like because it's all of these early team members, like everyone wants to help him and protect him. And everyone's like, what do we do? And you know, that's the hardest thing about, you know, mental health and drug abuse, which then like circle together. But ultimately, when it's affecting someone's brain, they can't necessarily recognize that themselves. And someone said to me, it's like you're speaking Polish to them. You may think you're speaking English, a common language. There is no understanding in that conversation of what each other is saying. And actually that did start to make sense, but it was just very difficult. And I think, you know, again, I got fired in February, so like a month into this, and it'd been the worst month of my life, like truly like horrendous, like so emotionally difficult.
What happened in that break? Do you know? Have you got any suspicions?
Yeah, I think he was very curious, and I think he took everything to an extreme. And I think he'd been reading a lot around psychedelics and kind of how to access different parts of your brain. And I think he experimented a lot during that break.
And do you think that triggered some kind of psychotic episode?
Yeah.
So on that point about being fired.
Yeah.
How were you fired?
I knew it was coming.
What? How? Why?
Because I'd gone from being, we were inseparable, to I was suddenly pushed out of everything, excluded from conversations, emails. He came to London. I was in London at the time when I got fired. And again, when he'd landed in London, from the minute he landed to the minute he left, we would be together. And I barely saw him.
How did that feel?
So hurtful, because hurtful and confusing and just really hard. And I guess you have like a whole team who are like, what's happening? Everyone is scared because it's a very strong personality who now could take anything anyone in the team said the wrong way, and kind of someone could be at the end of quite, you know, an explosion of anger, which again was never there before. So it's just a very difficult situation of one where you don't even understand it, which I think is what makes it so hard. But I think at that point we didn't maybe know the extent of how things were going to spiral from there, or how mentally unwell he was. Because I mean, 6 weeks earlier, he'd been the Brandon like we all knew and loved. So it was such a quick turnaround and change. And I remember getting a call from the person who ran our HR at the time. And I remember just saying, like, I know, like, he wants to fire me. And obviously she said, yeah. And then, and I remember just like crying my eyes out. And actually at the time, the person from Estee Lauder Companies who was on the M&A team, who's based in New York, he was in London at the time. And I went to meet him. And I remember just saying, like, I'm scared because I don't know what's happening. And this is someone who's just entirely changed. And I don't know what to do to help him. And I remember then, you know, the confusion of someone's now acting. It doesn't matter what agreements are in place. This is now someone acting irrationally. But we've got to act in a certain way because it's someone who is so unpredictable in the way. And again, I think at this point I hadn't really realised how bad things were going to be. And, you know, part of you thinks like, maybe it is me, like, maybe I'm not the right person to be there anymore. And maybe for whatever reason, like, he thinks I don't believe in the vision or things have just changed. My husband, who's like the most supportive person in the world, but also very calm, takes such a like relaxed approach to anything. Like nothing is a problem to him in his world in a very positive way. He like booked us a holiday. He was like, let's just get away. And like, you know, it's been like a very hard month. Right now, Brendan like doesn't want you. We can't change that. So let's just focus on just like taking a moment just to kind of reflect. And obviously I'd always wanted children. We'd been married for a few years at this time. I'd never wanted them whilst I was in like the busyness of Deciem because I wanted the time to enjoy being, you know, a mum of young children. So we were like, let's try and have a baby. So I got pregnant in the March. And
a month later.
Yeah. And but then at that point things were spiraling with Brendan and, you know, abusive emails were being sent, targeting everyone. He was firing so many people within the business, firing people and copying the whole company in, copying retailers in, press in. And it became clear like things were really unwell. And I remember, I think being about 6 weeks pregnant and I was being targeted on like some of these emails. And I remember thinking, if I tell him I'm pregnant, because I know he's so kind, that maybe he'll like leave me alone or it might like impose something. And then he announced it on Instagram when I was like 6 weeks pregnant. And something like that happens. You know someone's not rational. Like, no good human being does that to someone. And then it became really hard because I was still in this situation of loving him so much, wanting to help him, feeling just not knowing what to do. Also having like the company and like having everyone still coming to me asking me like, what should we do? Because you've got someone saying things that make no sense and being, you know, he was just very, very unwell. So I was still trying to like help people in the background, keep things going with the business. Obviously, you know, trying to be in the early stages of pregnancy, which now obviously the whole world knew. And it was just really, really hard. And I remember when he first got sectioned, feeling such a sense of relief that he was finally going to get the treatment he needed to get better. And it was actually in London when he got sectioned for the first time. And then he was out 5 days later. And then that was the start of, you know, over that 2018, he got sectioned 5 times across London, across Canada, across America. And each time would just get released a short period after. And then that's when I started to almost kind of, you lose the hope of like, how can we help this person when he keeps getting into these terrible, like, you know, to get sectioned, you're in a terrible situation for authorities to actually come in and remove you for your own safety. But then this would just happen again, and it's almost like there wasn't even a connection between like the countries and the medical systems and kind of like how that all works is confusing. But he asked in the June, you know, he was sending me videos crying and just saying like, I need you back. I don't know what I've done. Like, I'm so sorry. And I remember feeling like I can't help if I'm not there. Maybe if I'm with him, maybe I can help him. So I went back, and the first week I went back, we went to Morocco because he was like, you know, we need to plan, like we need to get the business thing sorted again. And actually it felt like a normal-ish conversation. So I remember feeling like, you know, maybe things can get better. And I remember the week in Morocco, just things were worse than ever. Things had got even worse in that time I'd been away. And it's a helpless situation. And I have so much empathy for anyone who, or one, the people who struggle with mental health and addiction, but also for the people surrounding them, because it's a very toxic environment to be in. One, because you're being abused, but secondly, you're losing the loved person, and thirdly, you just feel like you can't help, because again, with so many other health issues, when you're not battling with the brain, there's more acceptance of treatment to get better, but that just doesn't exist in the same way.
I can tell how much you loved him.
Honestly, he was like, and this is what I find so hard, like, he really was so kind and like would do anything. And again, like, you know, when I talk about Desi and being a family, in his estate, in his will, every single beneficiary is a DECIEM employee. Like, that's this family bond that was just so strong. So just to see that go, and again, like, everything was played out on Instagram. Brandon was doing all of these posts in terrible situations, and it's a very hard line. I mean, we talked to Instagram like this. It's such a difficult. You have free speech. You have someone like it's a platform, like people can post what they want. You know, some things would get removed, others wouldn't. But it was just an awful situation to be in. And I think everyone just had such a huge desire to help him. And like in this time period, I mean, even like Estee Lauder companies were behind the scenes. They were so supportive to us. But again, you go on Instagram and you see all these comments. Why is no one helping him? What are you all doing? And again, it's so hard because people don't see that situation of it is pretty much impossible to help. And then you have people that say, look, someone has to reach rock bottom. Like, they have to just reach rock bottom until they get better. So then in October, Brandon had done an Instagram post basically saying he was shutting down the entire company and there would be no more DECIEM. And obviously that was the point when the shareholders had to step in, because suddenly, you know, I think at that point we had 800 employees. Like, there was everyone's jobs on the line. And again, you think, look, maybe this is the kind of bottom point he needs to reach to actually understand he needs to get help. So that's when the court order happened to remove Brandon from the company, which again is an incredibly hard situation because no one wants to remove the founder who they care so much about. And, you know, a founder who is such a visionary and is the brand, like, to feel like he is being forcibly removed from his own company is very difficult. But you've also got a situation where everything was public. So every email sent had the whole company on CC, had all the journalists, had all of our retailers, had customers on. Instagram posts were obviously going to everyone. So you're also living this out in public, which I think also makes it a lot harder. So in October, he got removed as the CEO.
Reflecting on what you said to me earlier in the conversation about him wanting to keep the family together and be part of the family based on his own early experiences, maybe his own family upbringing, that must have been particularly painful for him. Seems like he designed this company to be a family, and that's clearly one of the most important things for him. So for him to be ousted from his quote unquote family must have been tremendously painful. Did you ever learn about his early years? Did you ever learn about his own background, his family?
Yeah, it's interesting because for how close I was to him, when he became unwell, I actually learned how much I didn't know about him. And I think, I think he had a lot of challenges of never feeling accepted for who he was, which makes me so sad because me as a person, and especially like the Destiny that we have now, like we truly accept anyone and love anyone. It doesn't matter like who you choose to love, where you're from, like you belong to us, and like we are grateful. If you want to be part of the family, you are the family. So I find it hard that he never felt he never felt like he could be his true self, which I think I only learned more when he became unwell.
How?
Like he'd had this incredible life partner for 10 years that I didn't even know about.
A romantic partner?
Yeah.
A husband? A boyfriend?
Pretty much, yeah. And again, like those things that's a big thing to hide from someone.
Why was he hiding it?
Well, I can only think that was him feeling like he wouldn't be accepted for it. And I mean...
Because it's a man?
Yeah. And I mean, well, in the world today, but I mean, especially the beauty, like I'm so proud of the diverse team we have. Like he would have been so accepted, but I mean, he was from Iran. I think he maybe just had, well, I don't know. I can't say the reasons.
Attitudes are different.
Yeah. But he clearly never felt like he could share with the world who he truly was. And I mean, that's a huge thing to carry.
What about his parents?
So his mother died when he was very young, and I think he had a challenged relationship with his father. But again, I only learned a lot when he became ill. And I also have a battle with, if he didn't want to tell me, he didn't want people to know. So there's kind of a balance of, I have so many things that, gosh, I wish I could ask him.
What are those things?
About his childhood, about who he is, about why he felt the need to keep things secret. And then also just to understand, because, people say to me, did he have any signs of mental health challenges before? And again, it depends what you consider traits of mental health. But no, I mean, he was eccentric and he was, high intensity and many things that I think are traits often of founders. I mean, I would love to understand more. Like, how do we support people with mental health? Because again, I mean, for someone to be sectioned 5 times.
Why was he sectioned?
He would just be in very bad situations. Police would come and get involved, and then
Drugs,
mental health. And again, it's so hard to diagnose.
Cause and effect.
Because they both kind of spiraled each other quite dramatically.
He was doing meth in the UK, I read as well, and then he got arrested for...
Yeah, and again, my limited understanding of drugs, but I think crystal meth is about as bad as it gets, I think, in many ways. So then in October he got removed, and again I remember feeling like maybe this will show him, like, be the push he needs to get help. But it wasn't. Things just kept spiraling. And again, what's so difficult in these situations is, at this point, I think he's pushed pretty much everyone away who really loved him. And he's now, because you have to remember, he also had funds. He had, resources, which meant, at this point, he was now flying private jets everywhere. And he was kind of surrounded by people that I had never met before and who I don't think were particularly good people for him to have around. But I mean, you don't have control over another human being. And I think that's a thing that I really struggled with, was how much everyone wanted to help him and loved him. But at some point, so by October, I mean, we've had 10 months of so much hurt, so much trying to help him, so much, you have moments when you think you're getting through and maybe like this is going to like be a change, and then things just fall down again.
So he then, when you've got sort of 700 employees, takes to Instagram and announces that he's shutting down the company. And did he mean that?
Yeah, I think he did. Again, I don't know if he meant it or if he was just wanting to be removed. And almost, you know, if that was the reason he was kind of doing some of these behaviors, things had been very extreme. And I sometimes don't know if he would have thought, like, you know, what else do I need to do for someone to just take me out of this? So then obviously at that point, you know, the board, the shareholders, there's no choice but to now remove Brendan from the company.
Did they contact you after that?
So, yeah, they
privately. I mean, before the lawsuit and all that
Yeah.
stuff started, they'd said, "Listen, Nicola, we're going to have to do something here."
Yeah, and I mean, throughout this process, there were many conversations because, again, you know, every shareholder loved Brandon and cared for him, and like everyone's a good person in this. Like everyone wants to help someone that they've seen this brilliance in and kind of seen this quick downfall. And I think the viewpoint was always, how do we protect DECIEM so that Brandon can get better and come back? So it was always just a temporary order. And obviously they rang me because it would name me as becoming sole CEO in kind of the interim period. And again, you know, I had this thoughts that maybe this is what is needed for him to actually get the help, because sometimes they say, you know, you have to lose everything to hit rock bottom to then be accepting that you need help. But that didn't happen. And I think when the court order happened in October,
which is what, 3 days after he announces he's shutting down the company, or was it more?
it was a very quick period. I can't remember
Right.
exactly, but yeah, I think it was within days. But then things just seemed to keep spiraling. And obviously, you know, at that point in October, I was 7 months pregnant. So I remember I had like one last travel before I was at the kind of no flying stage. So I went to Toronto. And actually the first thing I did was bringing back a lot of the incredible team members that had gone during the period of 2018.
So I need to pause there because that's pretty astounding. You're 7 months pregnant. The founder has been ousted by a huge, like, multinational billion-dollar conglomerate, and you're thrust in as CEO of the company of 700 people who have just gone through chaos. What do you do day one?
So to assemble the team. So, you know, the key people who were incredibly close to Brandon, who had also been fired and kind of pushed out in all of this chaos, they needed to come back to the company because they were also co-founders. They were also people who had been there from the beginning, understood the values, and we desperately needed. I remember going for dinner with Stephen and saying, like, I need you to come back. So Stephen was our CFO at the time, and then we came back as a COO. And again, like, we just needed to get organization because, I mean, in this period of 2018, you have to remember our demand for the products went through the roof because, I mean, there was a lot of noise around what was happening, and
Did it help sales?
massively, which is frustrating, but, you know, because we had such good products, that was also in the conversation. But it was like, have you seen what's happening? Have you seen this Instagram? Have you seen
I
this
saw
founder?
it.
Like, it's
Do you know, I'll be honest with you, the only time I'd heard, because I'm not a buyer of the products, the Ordinary products, the only time I'd heard about the brand was I heard a story when I was in New York, I think in 2017, 2018, when I was living in New York, about this founder that had like hijacked the Instagram and was posting like a dead sheep. He posted like a picture of a dead sheep
Yeah.
or something. And I remember clicking on, this is so funny actually, I clicked onto the Instagram to like see what was going on. It's kind of like being nosy or whatever. And I was like, that branding's cool. So for the last 5 years, I've known it from that first moment. But I remember thinking that branding is really on the money.
well, in 2018, I mean, the brand was only a year old.
Crazy.
So actually, you know, many people's first interaction with the brand was probably through, you know, being told, have you seen this person on Instagram? Have you seen this breakdown that's happening in public? So that was, and I think that's one thing I find very hard, is that Brandon was an incredible human being. He was so kind. He was such a visionary. He was so high energy. He truly was a genius, that I find it hard that people didn't really know him from before. And actually so many people only learned about him through that period, which is very sometimes difficult to accept. But it is also the reality of just the situation and social media and the appetite for controversy that I think kind of exists today.
When the lawsuit was happening and he was being ousted, was there a point during that couple of days, that period, where he called you?
He became you couldn't reach him. He turned all his phones off. He didn't go to the court, or he was obviously should have, in normal world, would have a representation and would, he just vanished. It was just vanished.
So you come into the office, you assemble the team, you pull the people back.
Yeah. And again, so then for those next couple of months, we did hit, Brandon would sometimes be parked outside the front of our office in Toronto. And again, you have to remember, this is people who love him. But now there's a character who is still acting at times, frustrated, upset. And it's just a very difficult environment to be in.
You've got a responsibility now as CEO. You've got this guy parked outside the office. You're trying to focus the team. There's a guy parked outside the office who's capable of causing chaos to the company, to the team members, to the employees, really not, stable. Surely you've got a responsibility to call the police or something, or get him out of there. There's a conflict of interest.
It's such a hard, because you try everything. And actually you have to remember as well, during this period, I was back in the UK. So actually it was even harder because, at this point I'm 8 months pregnant, 9 months pregnant. So hearing this, but actually not being in Toronto to actually be there in head office with the team. And again, that's where Stephen and kind of other members were incredible. And again, it's difficult because, Stephen would there'd be a conversation with Brandon, and then you'd get to the point where people would just be leaving out the back exit to kind of, because it's such a horrible situation. He's not doing anything wrong sitting in his car on the road. So it's kind of, you couldn't even ring the police unless he was actually acting abusive, but sitting in the car alone,
Were you not worried?
Everything was more just sadness of how he would be feeling at that time. And then you just get frustrated at yourself because, I think we're so used to figuring out the answer, figuring out solutions. So then when you're in this heartbreaking situation of, trying to be nice, trying to be there, trying to ask if he's okay, being away, being distant, nothing works. And actually that feels very hard, I think, to actually accept, especially as someone who, I like to find solutions. There's a problem, we find the answer. So it was a hard period. And then my daughter was born December 29th, just 4 days after Christmas. And then I remember in the January getting a message. So Dion the press had got in touch with us to say, is it true Brandon's died? We had heard nothing at this point. And I remember thinking, surely not, we wouldn't be hearing from a reporter asking us the question. So I said to John, look, I'll ask Stephen to see if he can hear anything. So Stephen went to the police station, who confirmed they'd found his body and he'd passed away. I remember Stephen ringing me, and I was breastfeeding my daughter at the time, and just feeling this shock, because you just never think that's actually the ending that's going to come. I think I always did just think at some point he would get better. And actually not within a year, someone could go from being the person and you love and who is normal and is in for them, to a year later that this such a fast downward spiral has happened that's kind of had that ending. And then I then realised that I don't think his partner knew. I don't think any of our DECIEM family, no one knew other than that reporter. But if the press know, that means quite quickly everyone's going to know. So then having to go through this process of ringing his partner, ringing the people that I knew were incredibly close personally to him, ringing Estee Lauder companies, telling the people that had to know, and then quite quickly having the email drafted, because also, this press inquiry has gone to our general media at DECIEM inbox, which means the team are already knowing that this inquiry is out there. So suddenly it's okay, gosh, I need everyone to hear this in the right order. So trying to make those phone calls, send those messages.
Did you process it yourself?
No, I think I remember just the shock of, I really didn't think it was going to end in that way or that soon. And then I think it was just, okay, let's like go through the motions. Like, who do we need to tell? Like, how do we handle this from here? And then I remember like then being like, I need to get Mila a passport because we flew to Toronto 5 days later. And just go into like, how do we, because again, it's not just a company that's left a founder, it's a family, it's a friend, it's someone who's so close to all of us. And it's also hard because it's just such a tragic story and a tragic ending. And, and I think back to sometimes like our family bond, and especially the bond that we still have now, so many people who were there at the beginning. But I mean, we lived through this, like we had this year of all messaging each other around, this has just happened, what do you think we should do? How do we handle this situation? Like we lived that pain together, which I think is probably why there is a bond that I think is still incredibly strong that wouldn't normally exist, because it does strengthen when you go through those tough times together.
He was on his own when he passed away?
Yeah. He posted Instagram videos on that night. So we know from various things that he was obviously still in this cycle of drug abuse and then kind of mental health. We don't know. No one was there. He fell off the balcony. I don't believe it was suicide with an intention to end his life, because I believe he'd have left a note. He'd have sent an email. He was big on words. Like he always had something to say, that I find it hard to think that he would. And again, even if it was videos, like there was always kind of communication coming from him, that I find it hard to believe he would purposefully end things without having a last kind of voice in the world. But again, when you are in that situation, I don't know if he was sat on the edge and kind of felt it was a high floor apartment. There was kind of huge storms and winds that night. But I mean, none of us were there, so we'll never truly know what happened.
As well as your job of sort of communicating this to your team and dealing with the after effects of his passing, when do you process it? This is someone you love. This is your friend that you've just found out has died. This is your co-founder, your former co-CEO, someone you've been on an incredible journey with. When do you have a chance to stop and just really work through the emotions?
I actually don't know if I ever have, even to this day, because it's just hard when, Deciem was so busy, because we've just gone through this year of turmoil where demand has gone through the roof, yet behind the scenes, people have done an amazing job at holding things together, but it'd also been a year of no leadership, kind of decisions being made in the wrong way, a lot of chaos there. So you suddenly have this situation of like, there's a lot to fix, there's a lot to sort out, and I'm not talking even from like culture and emotions, but just actually from like business practicalities, because this is a brand that's exploding with this kind of soaring demand, that's had this chaos, that now needs stability. It needs kind of all of this love put back into it and back into the team and people. And then obviously I also have a newborn baby at this time. So I feel like almost just that period since then, like things have just been so busy. And I'm just a big believer in like there are you pick the times in your life when you're ready to focus on something. And I know there's a period in my life I want to sit down with a psychologist and just go through everything that happened to have a better understanding of it. But I feel like it needs to be at the right time when I'm ready. And actually to really I'm someone that when I put my energy into something, it becomes such a big focus, and I want to do it right. And I know at the moment with everything going on, I wouldn't have the right time to dedicate to it. And also probably partly healing, like it's still, it'll be 5 years in January since he passed away. it's coming to a time when I think it maybe gets easier, but it's also still very raw, because I think it's hard to say if it's regrets, but you always have those feelings of, is there anything different we could have done? Because you feel so helpless about how things just spiraled.
That's what I was going to ask, is upon getting that news, the people often talk about this when they talk about the passing of a parent or something. They look back on the relationship from a new perspective now, because, as you said in your own words, you didn't ever envisage it would end that way. So when it does end that way, your perspective on the situation can shift to what you, as you said, you know, thoughts of regret or words unsaid or things that maybe we could have done, and that can be quite that can consume one's thoughts. Was there a lot of that during that time?
I think because, you know, the year 2018, I'd had a lot of reflections of maybe we weren't as close as I thought, because, you know, if you could have this life partner and all of these things and not even feel comfortable to tell me, then maybe I thought we were this closest that we actually weren't. You start to kind of question those things. And actually the area which I then kind of got the comfort back that it was genuine and it was the love that I felt that he felt, was when we got a copy of his estate, of his will, of his kind of last wishes. And when it said around the decision on what should happen with his body, it first went to his partner of 10 years. And then it said, and in absence of that person, I want Nicola to decide what happens to my body. And actually that was a very comforting thing, because I mean, there's nothing more personal than to trust someone with, if something happens to me, this person can decide what happens to like my remains. So that then actually gave me the comfort that like, it was genuine. It was a true love. Like, he did see me as that, other than his partner, like his kind of best friend, his partner, someone who was incredibly close, who he would feel like that was the right person to make that decision. So I'd kind of gone on this cycle of feeling, you know, very pushed out, very targeted, very, maybe it wasn't all real. Maybe I was just a colleague and kind of it was just business, to actually know it was family, it was love. So I kind of had that reflection, and I think that gave me a lot of comfort.
Do you miss Brandon?
Incredibly much. You know, it's quite lonely, because when you've gone from having someone where every decision you're texting, you're together, you're doing it together, gives you the confidence that you're going in the right way. So it's very difficult to lose that. And, you know, it's like you go from a 2-parent to just 1 parent, and you feel responsible for this incredible child, but also a child that's growing very fast. And, you know, you want to do the best by everyone. And it's, and also like it's a huge change. I mean, the company we are today is very different. And, you know, like with any kind of fast growth business, you have to try and find the balance of, you know, never compromising on our values and things that are so core to our purpose, but then finding a way that you can actually grow and scale. And actually, you know, when we, you know, early years, we've never had a strategy, and it was kind of never anything that I thought we would do. But then obviously you grow to a size that you start thinking about these things. And it was interesting, because the first time we did strategy,
I think it's worth pausing there and just highlighting what you've just said. You had a philosophy early on where you didn't have a company strategy.
It was never planned, never have a strategy.
That was your ethos, isn't it? Why?
We actually, again, we had all of these slogans in our offices, and one was strategy is also overrated. Okay. And you need to be agile as a startup. And again, I think, you know, a big thing, Brandon was a big believer in this. He always used to say, we've got to be the small rabbit running into the holes that the big elephants can't get to. And the big elephants obviously being the big conglomerates, because they've got far more money than us, far more resources. There is no point us doing what they're doing, but with far less. Let's find the holes. And part of that is, again, being agile. I mean, again, you think The Ordinary was the 11th brand. And as much as we had like elements of success before then, you know, The Ordinary, it took 11 attempts to really get it right. Now, a strategy can't plan for that. because our strategy was to keep failing until we kind of got it right. Now, as you get bigger, it changes because suddenly, you need to articulate things in a different way. But it was interesting because when we did our first process of strategy, and obviously I'm still at this point was very on the fence of, I don't think we're a company that kind of needs a big document, etc. So it's quite nice after we'd kind of had all these conversations, we came down to basically having our entire strategy was build growth, power good. That was the strategy, because almost it was, and again, I'm very proud that I feel like we're more than just a beauty company. We want to have a good impact on the world. We believe in making incredible products, but also having a good impact on the planet. I believe the world of skincare is now a better place because there is more transparency. There's more awareness, ingredients like niacinamide. I think there's better price points. I think there is, we talk about quality equality. And actually within skincare, I think that's something that now is much more accessible to people. So I believe like we are having a good impact. And I think that businesses can do that. And, I like, if you ever get the chance to come to Toronto, and, I welcome anyone to come look around our offices, our production facility, because the warmth you find from people is unlike anywhere I've ever, I think, could exist.
Ladies and gentlemen, as you know, Zoe is now sponsoring this podcast, and I'm a proud investor in the company. And I've been going on the Zoe journey myself. It all starts with this home testing kit you get sent in the post, which measures your gut health, your blood sugar, and your blood fat. I've had this little device, this blood sugar glucose sensor on my arm, which came in the home testing kit, to understand how all of the different foods that I eat day to day have an impact on my body. And it's been pretty unbelievable. A big thing for me is feeling tired after I've eaten something and not understanding why. Historically, I didn't understand. Now I do understand. I'd been eating, I think it was like a rice stir fry with a bit of chicken and some chili sauce in there. And I saw on my blood glucose chart on my phone, which is connected to the device that Zoe sent me, this huge spike. And then later in the day, I saw a huge dip when I started feeling that sort of post-lunch slump. And what will happen next is, Tim tells me they'll take all of that data and give me my own personalized Zoe scores for any food so I can figure out what I should be eating and what I should avoid if I want to avoid those afternoon slumps. And if you want to get started on your Zoe journey with me, use the code, we've got an exclusive code here, CEO10 for 10% off, and let me know how you get on when it arrives. Back to the episode. If I was to ask you then, again, we're looking there at like the finished painting. I want to know the colors that went into the painting. So how, and you were there the whole time, so you got to see what created that end product. If I'm a startup founder listening to this now and I go, okay, Nicola, I'm at the very start and I want that end product. I want to be 10 years in, super successful, and everyone's happy. What are the most important things for them to understand, embody, and sort of implement into their companies? Just maybe like top line.
So from a business perspective, product quality is the only way to be successful. And therefore, the only reason we're now in a position where I think we can invest so much in sustainability, social impact, and people is because if we started with science, we made the very best product that people know they get results with, which ultimately has allowed us to grow. And again, it comes back to this, the more we build growth, the more we can power good. And this is a continuous circle that we're now in that I think is just, the bigger we get, the bigger impact we can have, which I think is very powerful. And then I think from a people perspective, any founder can now write the new rules. And again, for us, it's around like belonging. Everyone belongs at Deciem. Like that's our North Star. Like we have so much work on how we make people feel belong.
Why does that matter? I'm playing devil's advocate here, obviously. Why does that matter? Why does that help me be successful?
Because you want humans to feel supported, to feel safe, to feel trusted, if you want to get the best from someone. And also, we have such a diverse workforce. Even 50% of our team, 50% of our leadership is BIPOC, and we continue to kind of strive to do more. But I think that diversity, like the more different viewpoints you have in a room, the more you're going to drive innovation, you're going to drive creativity, you're going to move things forward. And actually, a favorite quote I had of Brandon's was he said, which I always just find fascinating, like people are skeptical and then one day planes do fly. And again, if you think back to like, there would have been a point where someone say, what, we can fly in an aeroplane in the sky? And it's, like that would have been baffling. And then it happens. So actually, incredible change and advances can happen. And it starts with small changes. It starts with some, we always say, like, we started as a group of just good people having fun, wanting to do the right thing. And then it's kind of led to where we are today.
What are your non-negotiables? Because you're the chief disciple of Deciem. You're the one that knows exactly what a Deciem person is, how they behave, what a Deciem decision looks like, what Deciem behavior looks like. What are your non-negotiables?
Definitely kindness. I also always say, like, you have to do the right thing even when no one is looking. And for me, that's like the authenticity piece. And then that's also the difference, I think, between being nice and being kind, is that actually, even if someone's not looking, you're always just doing the right thing. Caring about the small things, because actually the small things become the big things over time. So I think really nurturing that. And just thinking differently. And again, it's something where if you're taking inspiration from the industry or category you're already in, there's no point, because you're just going to end up doing what everyone else is doing. You need to take inspiration from everywhere but the industry and category you're playing in, because, as I said, like The Ordinary, inspiration came from pharmacy, from healthcare. If we took inspiration from the world of beauty and skincare, we'd have just done what everyone else is doing, but with far less resources and kind of ability behind us. So I think where you take inspiration from is very important.
I'm going to do a little bit of a quickfire here. I hate quickfires in interviews because it's so shitty and inauthentic, but I just want to make sure my stats are correct. How many staff do you have today?
Just shy of 1,500.
How many stores have you got?
We've got 32 of our own stores.
How many of the positions in your company are held by women?
We're
Roughly.
over 50%.
The vast majority of your products are still under $10?
Yes, our best-selling ones are.
Okay. You're the most searched skincare brand on TikTok.
Yes, we're very proud of our TikTok virality.
You're the most popular skincare brand in Boots as well.
Yeah, I know, maybe on .com.
Do you know how many products you sell a second? I love stuff like that.
I lose track. Is it 2 a second?
I have no idea.
Oh,
yeah,
no.
I don't have it in front of me. I was just
I
curious.
thought you had it there.
No.
I think with niacinamide, it may be 2 a second.
Right.
Yeah.
Looking back at the career you've covered so far, what's the advice that you wish someone had given you? Let me say the day you met Brandon. If I could have just ring, your phone goes, and it's you at 34 years old, you are?
34 now, yes.
34 years old. And you got to speak to Nicola back then on the phone, 60 seconds. You get to give us some advice.
Stay calm. Always find the positive in everything, because I think that positivity is what's infectious and actually makes other people believe in what you want to do and kind of can get you through the toughest times by just being calm, being kind, and just, have belief in the end game. Like, we're on this planet for such a small amount of time. Some things you can control, some things you can't. Life isn't fair. You have your own situation. And I think I've always found coming to things just with an air of calmness has always been the best way. Like, I don't get stressed out, and I think that's an important quality.
It's not easy. Don't get stressed out.
It takes a lot.
What does your mother think of everything that's happened in your career?
Incredibly proud. And I'm incredibly close to my mum. Like, I see her every week, and what's also been nice is she's travelled so much with me. She's so often my childcare, kind of looking after them when we travel, and Sean's parents, they're very close to. But yeah, I think she's just incredibly proud of how everything's turned out.
And your father passed when you were...
When I was 20. And again, it's very hard, because probably see some similarities, I think, between kind of what happened back then and I guess just the uncontrollability and the ability to help the situation because, you know, up until the age of, well, when I was 18, like 2 years before he passed away, I mean, he was healthy, he was well, he liked to drink, but, you know, not to the point of being an alcoholic. And then very quickly things spiraled. So he loved being a radio presenter and like that was his life. But I think it is a hard industry where suddenly you're not current anymore and there's younger presenters coming through. And he'd gone from presenting on the radio station for literally 25 years or something. You know, he started at 18 and had been very successful in kind of the big kind of South Yorkshire radio station, and suddenly it was taken away from him. And I think that created just a spiral. And, you know, he also, I think, had challenges with his upbringing, and alcohol just became a coping mechanism. And again, I think it just, both times, it surprised me how quickly it can happen. And again, with 2 years, like, my father had gone.
I'm gonna give you a picture.
I wouldn't be a guest if I wasn't crying. My grandma died on Monday as well, so yeah. It's just extra whammy of all the emotions.
You okay?
But yeah.
We're gonna get you some tissues. Jack, have you got some tissues there?
Thank you.
The conversation around addiction, we don't. It's taken us some time to understand its relationship with mental health, right? And in that situation, what you describe is the loss of your father's purpose, and how that turned him to alcohol, and then within a short period of time, I'm guessing there was an alcohol-related death.
Yeah.
When you were 20, the world it certainly wasn't in a place that's sort of 14, 15 years ago, wasn't in a place where it would have understood alcoholism in the same way. Were you able to understand the causes of your father's behavior at that time?
I felt like I could understand it, as in the way of, I remember one of the doctors saying to us, because he was in hospital quite a few times, like, you have to treat this as a terminal illness, because even if he gets better, it's there and it can come back within the brain at any time when it's a severe addiction.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I kind of understood what was happening. Again, found it incredibly difficult of being helpless in terms of, again, you go from someone who you love and who loves you and who would do anything for you and for their family, just suddenly, again, this not talking the same language. And again, it's very hard, I think, with addiction and any of it, like alcohol abuse, because you find it hard, like, why can't they just stop? Like, they love us, like, why do they want to be in this situation? And again, it takes like the rethinking around, like, they can't help it, like, this is an illness just like cancer, like other diseases, like their brain is ill and they can't think of anything other than how they can get the next drink. And I think it's just a hard thing to accept, feeling helpless when there isn't a medication. You know, again, in the UK, you can't put someone into rehab unless they want to go, but they've got their brain battling with them that won't allow them to make that decision.
And when everything happened with Brandon, it was like history repeating itself again. You watched someone you love slowly slip away into...
Yeah, it was... I guess one of the differences with my dad, he never became... He was still very loving and kind, even though, you know, he couldn't stop. Whereas I think with Brandon, things were much more, it was more anger, and there was kind of more, my dad always still had the love and the kindness coming through even when he was ill.
Were you able to process that, your father passing? Did you take the time? Did you get the support? Did you have anyone there to speak to about that?
Probably not really. I think I just keep busy, and actually I'm generally a very like positive, calm, happy, like I truly have a high level of happiness in my life despite all that tragedy that has happened. And I get so much joy and so much love, and like I have so much support from my husband and my mum and my sister, and you know, some of the best friends in the world who've been my best friends since we were in school, that I've just, it's strange to go through everything that's happened, but actually still feel very just secure and loved. Which I think, you know, I often say this, like, despite what happened, I mean, I had 18 years of probably a very boring, but very stable, loving, happy childhood that I think really does set the foundations for later life.
And now we're here. And you've got a wonderful husband, you've got 2 gorgeous, wonderful, beautiful children that are happy and healthy, and then you've got 1,500 children at DECIEM who are doing just great as well. How are you feeling?
Honestly, very privileged, very lucky. I mean, to be like 34 and I feel like actually I've accomplished so many of my dreams, like having my children, having an incredible husband, having an amazing home, an amazing life together. And then also, like, I mean, how lucky that at 24, DECIEM came into my life and I've met the most incredible people. I have best friends now from the company. I live in such an exciting world. Like, you know, I get to work with one of the best brands and companies in the world. And also actually, I like to think influence and set the footprint for actually what business can be. Like, it can be a place where leaders can be kind. They don't, you know, if you think around business from 20, 30 years ago, I'm probably the polar opposite to what would be expected to be a leader.
You don't have a big glass box. You don't sit in your own big glass office above everybody else. I heard you hot desk. Your team told me you hot desk with them.
I've never had my own desk in any office at DECIEM. Probably the only person to never have my own desk. And actually, I love it. First of all, because I'm traveling and you know, whenever I'm somewhere, I always want to spend time with people. So normally I am in meetings that I want to be in, just getting to know everyone. And if I do have time on my desk, hot desking is far better. Like, who's not in today? Or go and sit in their desk, because then you get to talk to another team. You get to be around people. So I've always kind of just enjoyed the floating piece of just getting to know everyone in the team.
We have a closing tradition on this podcast, as you know, because clearly you just said you'd watched an episode before. So this is this will not be a surprise. We have a closing tradition where the last guest leaves a question for the next guest. This is a bit of a long one. The question is, okay, I've been trying to figure out what this word is. That's why I was mumbling around, because I was like, I can't. Okay, stasis is a lie. In every moment, we are either progressing towards the better self within or regressing. So the question is, who are you becoming?
I think I'm becoming someone who is just accepting of who they are and actually just being very content and being happy with who I am. And I think, you know, like people always ask me like, and I have no plans to leave DECIEM, but people always say like, after DECIEM, what do you want to do? And they always don't believe me when I say like, I just want to be a mum. Like, that's so important to me. Like, and again, I talk about chapters in life. Like, if that's that period that I get one chance at life to do, then I want to prioritize that. And I think, you know, sometimes people associate, well, because you've been like business and you've been driven, that becomes a conflict. But it doesn't, because also I think the qualities that make me want to dedicate so much to my children and being a good mum probably also what actually makes the culture what it is at Deciem today. So I think just accepting that actually we're all unique, and I am very content at this moment in life. I feel I don't particularly have any regrets. I want to know more about if things could have been differently in this, the bad situations that have happened. But I think because I've always feel like I've approached things with kindness, that I've been true to myself, that actually that's something that I kind of want to continue to be.
Well, you certainly do embody kindness, and your team described you as being a ray of sunshine. That is my experience of you. That is also my experience of your husband, who I met a year ago, who is also a wonderful human being. Thank you. Thank you for so much. Thank you for the inspiration. You really are an example that in order to be a successful leader in business, you don't need to be what we used to see in movies, which is like screaming and shouting at people and throwing things from the glass box and being cruel and being selfish and being a leech on society or the earth or whatever it might be. You are one of those shining examples that success and kind aren't mutually exclusive. In fact, clearly in your case, from speaking to your team and seeing how much they adore you, it's additive to the outcome of success. It doesn't deduct from it. But your story as well, it should be a movie, and I'm sure it will be a movie someday, or at least an incredible series of books. Is one that is so incredible, so inspiring, so unthinkable at times. And the way that you share it with such wisdom and vulnerability is going to induce so much light and inspiration and liberation in everyone that's listened today. So sometimes when I do this podcast, I realize that I have to thank you on behalf of the listener, because I realize the listener is at home and they are going to DM you and all that stuff, because they do that a lot, which is fantastic. But I would really like to thank you on behalf of everyone that listened to this conversation, because I know how many of them in so many ways that you'll never understand. You'll see maybe 1% of it. You'll never understand how much you've helped. And you don't have to. You don't have to come and do these things and share the way you do and open yourself up like this. You do have a choice in that, and you've chosen to do that. And I know why you've chosen to do that. And it's because of the value that you've shared today. So thank you, Nicola. It's been a pleasure to meet you. You're very much the reason why I do what I do here, is to find the stories like this and to share them with the world. And you'll continue to inspire me for many years to come through all those chapters of your life that you described.
Amazing. Thank you for having me. Thank you for listening.
Right now, I'm incredibly busy. I'm running my fund where we're investing in slightly later stage companies. I've got my venture business where we invest in early stage companies. Got a third web out in San Francisco and New York City, where we've got a big team of about 40 people and the company's growing very quickly. Flight Story here in the UK. I've got the podcast, and I am days away from going up north to film Dragon's Den for 2 months. And if there's ever a point in my life where I want to stay focused on my health, but it's challenging to do so, it is right now. And for me, that is exactly where Huel comes in, allowing me to stay healthy and have a nutritionally complete diet even when my professional life descends into chaos. And it's in these moments where Huel's RTDs become my right-hand man and save my life. Because when my world descends into professional chaos and I get very, very busy, the first thing that tends to give way is my nutritional choices. So having Huel in my life has been a lifesaver for the last 4 or so years. And if you haven't tried Huel yet, which is, I'd be shocked, you must be living under a rock if you haven't yet, give it a shot. Coming into summer, things are getting busy, health matters always. RTD is there to hold your hand. Had a lot of controversy over the last 2 years. Bullying, lying, unfair dismissals, all of this stuff. What do you say to that?
I did push people too far.
How fast did Brewdog grow?
We have grown on average 87% a year.
Fucking hell.
Everyone told us, make your beer cheaper, change your name, change your packaging, and we didn't listen to any of that. How can we get our name out there with no money at all? So we had to do things that were intentionally provocative, and sometimes we can cross that edge as well. The best entrepreneurs have got to find a way to do things differently to how other people are doing things. We've got 2 very simple tests that we apply to everything that we do. So the first test is,
This is the worst public health crisis for a generation.
I've only ever been in tears once in my job, and I broke down in tears addressing our team in March of 2020, thinking that we're not going to be able to pay you, we're not going to be able to keep you in a job. I think people don't realise, like, being a CEO is a very, very lonely job at times.
That day, talk me through what it's like to be a CEO when 300 people sign a letter making these allegations about toxic workplace culture, unfair dismissals, all of this stuff. So without further ado, I'm Stephen Bartlett, and this is the Diary of a CEO. I hope nobody's listening, but if you are, then please keep this to yourself. James, what is you've listened to this podcast before, so you know I have a theme of where I start. I'm like trying to frame it as a surprise that I'm going to start with your childhood. But first, thank you for being here. It's it's always lovely to hear that people are guests that we have on also kind of understand the format. Where I wanted to start with you is to take you right back, because that for me is always the context of somebody. So when you look back, and when I read back at your early years in that small fishing community you grew up in, was it Gardenstone?
Yeah, Gardenstone up in the northeast of Scotland.
When you look back yourself at the foundational shaping, pivotal events of like those early years that are responsible for who you became in your life, the first events that you look back and go, that's the first dot I can connect. What are those?
I think there's a few. So we grew up in a tiny fishing village northeast of Scotland. My dad was a fisherman. My mum was a school teacher, and being a fisherman is tough. And I just remember like the kind of hard work ethic instilled from my grandparent, who was grandfather, who was also a fisherman, my dad, who was a fisherman. So kind of really hard work and really honest, kind of salt of the earth type character. But then he was always away and I'd be at home with my mum, and my relationship with my mum was never that good. And I think I struggled a lot when I was a kid. I had quite a severe speech impediment when I was growing up, and this is something I haven't spoken about before. So that kind of always made me a little bit of an outsider, a little bit of a loner. Always felt a bit socially awkward. As I grew up and became a bit older, I had quite severe acne. So again, outsider, loner, socially awkward. And I think it's a trait that a lot of entrepreneurs have in common. They're a bit socially awkward. And I think if you're less likely to read social cues, then you're less likely to do the same thing as everyone else, which in business is amazing. And also a bit of an inadequacy complex when I was a kid as well. So kind of mum standards were quite high. So whatever I did wasn't good enough. 98% in a test, why wasn't 100? Won a swimming competition, why did I win it with an even better time? So like any achievement wasn't quite good enough. So growing up, bit of a loner, bit of an outsider, bit of a kind of inadequacy complex as well, which I think from a business perspective, those things combined are good, but made it kind of quite tough for me at certain stages of my childhood.
On that point of, I can relate a lot to a lot of that, especially the thought of feeling a bit like an outsider or feeling somewhat different. Were you bullied in school?
A little bit. I mean, the speech impediment was something that all the kids loved to make fun of, and then the kind of acne that I had that was quite severe in high school was something that a lot of kids made fun of as well, which just kind of makes you feel even more like an outsider when you're growing up, I guess.
Speech impediment?
Yeah, when I was like 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, there was like certain words and certain letters that I just couldn't say, and I kind of worked really hard with a speech therapist and got there, but for a few years it was a lot of words that I couldn't say, and because of that I just wouldn't speak to people because I was scared to let them see that I had a speech impediment. So very quiet, very insular, like spending time by myself, and that kind of shaped a lot of my early childhood, I would say.
When you said that you think entrepreneurs have that trait in common where they somewhat feel like outsiders, why do you think that's a common trait in entrepreneurs?
For me, the best entrepreneurs, they've got to see things differently, and they've got to find a way to do things differently to how other people are doing things. So if you go and do the same as everyone else, you're just going to get the same outcome as everyone else. And if you start off a business that way, you're just going to get lost in the mix. And I think 90% of small businesses fail within the first 2 years. So I think outsized returns or doing something amazing with a business only comes when you bet in some way against the conventional wisdom. And if you're not tied to the conventional wisdom or tied to social cues, I think you're more likely to see that. There's a quote that I love, which is if 99% of people think you are wrong, you're either massively mistaken or about to make history. So it's just that maybe not caring too much what people think, and finding your own way to do things and finding your own way to come at a business, an opportunity or a problem. And I think if you're a bit of an outsider, it maybe helps with that.
You mentioned your mum as well.
Yeah, I mean, my relationship with my mum was always quite tough. So nothing was ever good enough for mum when I was a kid, and had a few issues later. And I haven't spoke to my mum for over 20 years now.
Really?
Yeah.
Since you were in your teens?
Yeah, 19, 20 was when I stopped speaking to mum.
Did you ever, because sometimes when I think about, my own parents, with age, I've built a bit of, I guess, empathy towards why they are the way they are. And you kind of, when you grow a little bit older, you understand the world a bit better in psychology, but you go, well, maybe that's why they were the way they are. Have you thought about that with your mother?
Yeah, I definitely have thought about it, and it's something I continue to think about. And there was just a lot of kind of challenging things when I was a kid, and then when I was in my teens, that I think it made it difficult for us to have a relationship. And for me, it's easier just not to have contact with her, which is tough. But I've got a fantastic relationship with my dad and my rest of the family, and it's been that way for a long time now. Did
that have an impact on you? That sort of really tough feedback that you were never enough, or that your work was never enough?
Possibly, but I think it gives you a bit of a inadequacy, inferiority complex, which I think has kind of been with me for a long time. And there's ways to numb it. So can numb that voice in my head that's like, never been good enough, not good enough. Can numb it with a business achievement, with like doing a thing, with a book launch that goes well. So you get that almost temporary escape from that feeling by doing something that can be measured objectively, like succeeding in business.
Use the word temporary though.
I do, because it's always there. It's always there. And I think a chip in your shoulder in terms of like motivation is quite a powerful thing to have. But it's that kind of saying, it's like everywhere you go, there you are. It's kind of always there at a certain extent.
Your dad, he sounds like he was a very hardworking individual.
He was indeed. I mean, still to this day, he's in his late 60s. He's a lobster fisherman, which is a kind of tough, intense,
I've seen the
gnarly job. Every single day, regardless of the weather in the North Atlantic, he's out, pretty much out in his lobster fishing boat. So yeah, very focused on work, and that work ethic, that determination, I think a bit of kind of resilience as well. So I spent actually 6 years with my dad on the North Atlantic before I set up the business. So I studied law and economics at university. I got a job in a legal office. I quit after 2 weeks. So I sat there in a cheap suit doing glorified admin, and I was like, this is just not how I want to spend my life. I don't want to stay in this office. And I saw myself like being maybe 40, 50 years in the future, kind of retired and sitting in that same office and in a suit and stuff. I was like, this is just not for me. So I spent 4 years studying to do a job for 2 weeks. I quit and did something completely the opposite. So I got a job in the fishing boat. And when I was doing that, I went to nautical college part-time. I became a first mate. I became a qualified captain. And I kind of cut my teeth in the high seas in the North Atlantic. And I think it taught me so much about resilience, about teamwork, about adversity.
What did you learn then? Sort of it practically and actionably. What did you learn from? Was it 5 years roughly you spent on that boat?
Yeah.
So you come out of university, you try it out as a lawyer, working in laws for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Then you go and join your dad.
Yeah.
And eventually you work your way up to being captain on that boat.
Yeah.
And you're on a trawler in the North Atlantic.
Yeah.
Which is a stupid thing to do. If you're me and you're as big of a coward as I am, going out on those seas, I've seen the documentaries. Is it like the documentaries?
Yeah, it's very much like those documentaries. So some of those were made in my home port up in Scotland, and I know some of the people that were on some of those boats. So I mean, very much like that. The North Atlantic in January and February is a pretty scary place.
What did you learn from doing that about life and people?
I think the main lesson that I learned is, and it's one I've applied to the business as well, you only really see what someone's made of when things are difficult. It's only when things are going wrong, it's maybe a force 10 storm, you're trying to get the net back in the boat, it's dangerous, it's gnarly, it's 2 o'clock in the morning, everyone's been up for 24 hours. It's at those times that you really see what someone's made of. And I think that's something you can take to business as well. When everything's going well, it's easy for everyone in your team to look like a superstar. It's only when things are really, really difficult that you see who can you depend on. And I've almost got this test that I use when I'm building my management team. And we've got an amazing management team at the moment. But the test is, would I want to be in the deck of a North Atlantic fishing boat at 2 a.m, in a storm with everything going wrong with this person by my side? And if the answer is yes, it's usually kind of bodes well for how we work together and how we look to build the business together.
And in that example of would I want to be on the deck with them at 2 a.m. in the morning when everything's going wrong, what are the character traits which would make someone in that situation a good person to be with on that deck?
Yeah, there's something called the Stockdale paradox that I think is really important and kind of ties into this. So James Stockdale was an American naval captain who was in a prisoner of war camp for 6 years. And it's actually in the book Good to Great by Jim Collins, which is a fantastic business book. And he's got a philosophy, which is you've got to confront the brutal facts of your current reality without ever losing faith that you're going to prevail in the end. And I think it's just such an important lesson for life and business. You've got to believe that you're going to get there in the end, but that belief can't blind you from tackling the most difficult things about your current reality head on, with resolve, with optimism. But you've got to kind of hold that paradox in your hand. We're going to get there. We're going to achieve this thing, but we've got these huge challenges at the moment. Let's lean into those challenges. And I often start my business meetings with my senior team in the very same way. Okay, let's put the agenda to the side. Let's everyone write down a piece of paper. What's the 3 most difficult things you're facing in this business at the moment? And let's discuss those before we discuss anything else.
And why is that important?
Because it means you face into the problems and the challenges. And I think it's so easy for a business, especially a business like ours. We've always got so many exciting projects. So at the moment, we're opening a fantastic location on the Strip in Las Vegas. We're opening 20 plus locations in India. We've got a fantastic location opening in Waterloo Station. So it's so easy to get caught up in the excitement of those things. And everyone wants to speak about the exciting things, but you've got to balance that with, okay, we've got these challenges at the moment, and how we lean into those challenges, how we tackle those challenges is what to a large extent is going to determine our destiny. So we need to make sure that whilst we're focused on the exciting things and what we want to achieve, we're focusing on the really tough things we're facing on a day-to-day basis as well.
Interesting. I might steal that.
Well, I stole it as well. So, so you can steal the thing that I stole.
Did I say that out loud? I thought I was thinking it. You're right, because there's always kind of an elephant in the room at companies where many individuals in the room will know that there's certain challenges and issues, especially in the leadership team. They'll have the clearest idea of what those are, but sometimes they're quite uncomfortable to talk about, right? They are the things that are least enjoyable to commit brain time and power and resources to. So I guess that's a very smart way. You spent 5 years on this boat, which was a really great, brave thing to do in my estimation. You're captain of the boat.
Yeah, I spent a bit of time captaining the boat with my dad.
Captaining the boat. Why did you leave that role?
Well, I didn't quite leave it. So Martin, who's my best friend from high school, we go way back. We're flatmates. Yeah, Martin Dickey, we're flatmates at university together. We started making beers at home. So in Martin's mum's garage, we would make beer, and we started to get into beer when we tasted an American beer called Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. We tasted it, it was like, wow, we love this. So we would dedicate our weekends to kind of trying to recreate that in Martin's mum's garage. And in 2007, we'd always wanted to start a business. We decided to turn our hobby into a job. So we got a £20,000 bank loan. I had £30,000 of life savings, and we decided to set up this business. We set up in a derelict dystopian industrial unit in Fraserburgh, in a godforsaken industrial estate, and we had no money. So it was beg, barter, bootleg to kind of set this facility up. We had like old dairy tanks. Our water tanks were plastic tanks from a local garden centre because we had no money to buy stainless steel tanks. And we set out in this slightly naive, I think you could call it, mission to build one of the world's best beer companies with 2 humans and a dog, no experience, no capital, no business plan, nothing but just a huge amount of passion for fantastic beer, a huge amount of disillusionment at the status quo of the beer market, which was essentially just big mass market global mega corporations who turned beer, a thing that we love, into a lowest common denominator commodity product. And we wanted to make fantastic quality beers and open people's eyes to this diverse spectrum of flavor, taste, quality that they never knew existed, and take them on this beery journey with us. And that's what we set out to do in 2007. But the first few years were so tough.
What gave you the right to start a beer company?
Nothing at all.
You can't make, I can't make beer. How did you go about educating yourself on how to make beer?
So Martin studied how to make beer and distilling at university. So Martin's a really kind of solid technical background, and he's always kind of taken more of a lead in the beer side of the business. And I've always kind of been more in the kind of business side, the sales side, the marketing side, the expansion side of the business. So yeah, first couple of years, it was me selling beer at local farmers markets, selling beer out of the boot of my beat up Volkswagen Golf, but we couldn't afford to pay ourselves. So I moved back in with my dad. Martin moved back in with his mum. I had to start working in the fishing boat again part-time just because nobody wanted to buy our beer. Everyone told us, make your beer cheaper, make your beer with less flavor, make your beer with less hops, change your name, change your packaging. And we didn't listen to any of that. I mean, we were determined to, okay, if we're going to fail, let's fail doing something that we love. Let's fail doing something that we're insanely passionate about. And let's just keep going and see if we can find a way, find our breakthrough to somehow make that work. And that breakthrough for us came in 2008.
And you described that period as being one of the toughest of your life, that first year. Give me a detailed flavour of the hardest. Is there a moment in that period where you account maybe your hardest day?
I think so, yeah. So we did everything, the two of us. So it was just the two of us. So we did the accounts, we did the sales, we made the beer, we packaged the beer, like the whole thing. And we filled bottles by hand. So fill by hand, put on a cap by hand, put on a label by hand. The tanks held about 3,500 bottles of beer. So that took us kind of 20 hours to do. So we did that. And then straight through the night, the next day I was kind of, okay, let's go and see if I can sell some of this beer. So I had a few cases in the back of my car. Punk IPA, which is our flagship beer today, was the beer that we were trying to sell back then as well. I visited 6 or 7 different local establishments and gave them my best sales pitch. It's handmade, it's local, it's full of flavor. Everyone said no. The last person didn't just say no, he tasted it and he just spat it back into the bottle.
Really?
And just gave me the bottle back and essentially told me to get out. So I remember just walking to the car and just wondering, okay, what the hell am I going to tell the bank? We've got this loan. We can't pay the loan back. We can't pay the rent in the building. I've been up for almost 30 hours. This is going nowhere. Like, what can we do to try and get this business to survive? And for me, that was a very tough moment.
Why didn't you quit? Would have been easier. Could have just gone back to the boat, could have been captain, back out on the sea, lobsters, all that.
There was no way we were going to quit.
Why?
We were going to die in a ditch for this thing. We're just so passionate about it. And back to that inadequacy complex, this voice in your head, you're not good enough, you can't do it. If I quit, that voice wins. Couldn't let that voice win. So we kept on going, And I think any business story, there's a moment where you get a bit of luck, where you get a bit of good fortune. So for us, that came in 2008. We sent some beers into a Tesco beer competition. So this was at a time that we were selling, let's say, 10 cases a week at most. Sent the beer to the Tesco beer competition, kind of forgot about it and got back to local farmers markets and all those things. A few weeks later, I got a phone call from Tesco saying it would finished 1st, 2nd, 3rd and 4th in this Tesco beer competition. So I was like, okay. So I went down to...
Wait, is that the same beer that the guy spat out?
Same beer the guy spat out.
Really?
Came first.
The same beer?
The same beer.
Same temperature?
I think so.
Wasn't flat? That's interesting.
So I went down to Cheshunt, which is where the Tesco headquarters were at the time, and met the Tesco team. And I sat there with my best poker face on as they told me, James, your beers are fantastic. We want to put these 4 beers into 500 stores nationwide and we can sell 2,000 cases a week. So I signed a contract to do that without telling them anything at all about the fact this was 2 guys and 1 dog filling bottles by hand. And there was no way we could meet that order. So we had 4 months to figure out a way to do this. So got back, sat down with Martin and was like, okay, we've got this opportunity, but we need a plan. And we decided, okay, we need a bottling machine. That's going to cost us £100,000. We need tanks. That's going to cost us £50,000. So went to the bank, which was Bank of Scotland, who we banked with at that time. And this was 2008. So this is when global economy is going into this huge tailspin. And we sat down and like, okay, let's pitch this as hard as we possibly can. This is our chance. So we told them about the contract with Tesco, young up and coming company, but we need £100,000 for a bottling machine, £50,000 for tanks. And they just laughed us out of the bank. There was like, James, Martin, you're not paying your loan back. It's a tough time for banking. There's like no way we can give you this money here. So undeterred, what we did, we went to the bank that was across the street. We got an appointment there with HSBC, and we said to the guys at HSBC, our bank, Bank of Scotland, have just offered us an amazing finance deal in this bottling line and this fermentation tanks. We've got this contract with Tesco, but if you match this deal, we're going to shift all of our banking to you. We're going places as a company. We'd love for you to support us. And they gave us the money. So business plan year 1 and 2 was make hoppy American beers and tell lies to banks.
Are they still your bank?
They are still our bank to this very day.
How do they feel about doing that?
I waited 10 years until I told them the truth. I thought there was like a safe amount of time. They're not going to take the money back. We got the bottling machine in. We got the tanks in. The first beers came off the bottling line 2 weeks before they were due to go into Tesco. We got the beers into Tesco. They sold okay. Year 1, year 2, they sold a bit better, and we were able to kind of start building our business from there. That gave us a foothold. And at the end of 2009, I was able to quit being a part-time fisherman and just focus 100% on the business.
By 2009, so that's
end of 2009.
2 years,
2.5 years. Yeah.
Wow. And so that first year where they're selling okay, and then the second year where they're selling much better.
Yeah.
What was the causal factor of that sales increase that started to get things moving? Was it word of mouth? Was it marketing? Was it?
It was community. So one of the most important things in the history of our business has been community. So it got to 2009, and we'd exhausted the money we could get from banks, regardless of what we said. But we are a capital-intensive business, so we need money for stainless steel tanks to expand, and we were expanding quite quickly at that stage. And it was, how can we get money to expand our business? And we spoke to some potential investors, but it just didn't feel like the right fit for us as a business. So in 2009, we came up with this concept that we called equity for punks.
Yes.
So this was crowdfunding before crowdfunding was even a thing. And we thought, okay, if we can sell some of our business to the people who enjoy the beers that we make, we can hopefully create this whole new business model. We spoke to 5 legal companies up in Scotland, and they all told us what you're trying to do is essentially impossible. You can't do this. Spoke to a 6th company. It says, okay, we can maybe do it, but it's going to cost £150,000. There's a lot of risks. Nobody's done this before. We decided to do it. It cost us £150,000 at a time that we'd £50,000 in our bank account. So we gambled the entire future of our business on making this completely untried, untested business model that we just came up with called Equity for Punks a success. I was so nervous. Like the day that we launched Equity Punks, it's the most nervous as I've been in this business journey, because I knew if it doesn't work, game over for us, a business. So many people told us it was a bad idea. So many people told us people are not going to buy shares in a company on the internet. People that don't want to invest in a beer company. People just want to buy beer. There's a silly idea. There's too much paperwork. People's not getting to send in checks, which they had to do back then as well, as opposed to with some online payments, but those were cumbersome. So most people paid by check. But we wanted to do something different. And with Equity Punks, what we've been able to do is shorten the distance between ourselves and the people who enjoy the beer that we make. So we don't just have investors, we've got community, we've got advocates, we've got ambassadors, we've got people who believe what we believe, who want us to succeed and who are on this journey with us. The first Equity Punks was enough of a success to keep us in the game. We raised £500,000 from about 600 investors. But since then, we've gone on to build a community of 210,000 people, and we've raised almost £100 million through Equity Punks. And for me, it is the most special thing about our business. So the largest shareholder in our business is Equity Punks and our team, which I think is really cool. So we're community owned, we're people owned, and having that community with us, who then, when they walk into one of our bars, they feel like they're walking into one of their own bars. When they buy our beer off the shelf, they feel it's their own beer because they are part owner of that company. So completely new business model for a consumer brand in the 21st century, one that takes our consumers with us. And that community element is amazing. They're our biggest fans, they're our harshest critics. We get fantastic feedback from them. They help us find new locations, they help us develop new beers. And Equity Punks has been key to what we've done.
As we sit here in 2020, one of the biggest words in marketing is community now.
Yeah.
And you've kind of detailed that. I was going to ask you, but you've detailed very clearly the value of community. And the Equity Punks thing, when I read that, I think, okay, it's one way to raise money, but there's other ways to raise money. But it's really more about getting greater buy-in from your existing customer base and turning them into advocates and to diehards, which increases loyalty. It gets them to evangelize. As you say, when they buy beer, they're basically, it's almost like there's a discount on that beer. I know there is actually a discount as well, but there's actually a discount on it because they're enriching themselves. So it's a really interesting, innovative model. Is that similar to what like crowdfunding, equity crowdfunding is today? Was this before this?
Very similar. So this was before, but it's very similar to what that is today. And I think you've articulated what the model is perfectly. And for each of our beers that they drink, because they own the company, they get a tiny little bit better off financially, which is an amazing incentive to have a second can of Hazy Jane or Elvis Juice or Punk IPA on a Tuesday evening. And it's never just been about the money, because we could have raised money in other ways, but it's about building a different type of business and a business that's focused on community. And we do so much with our community. And we have our big AGM in Aberdeen, our annual meeting. Last time we had 15,000 equity punks come for our annual meeting. So I think it's like the most attended big AGM in the UK. Yeah. So we do the business things, but we've got fantastic live music. We've got amazing beers. And it's just the day where kind of everything that we love and believe in just comes together in one day, and it's always fantastic.
On money raising, did the BBC released a podcast you might have seen yesterday, like a podcast on the, I know you've had a sort of contentious relationship with them. One of the things that they leveled at you, which I wanted you to respond on, was in those hard times, they said your dad is wealthy. Yeah. So they said there was a suggestion that your dad might have been loaning you money.
Yeah. So my dad is wealthy-ish, not excessively wealthy and not nearly as wealthy as the BBC said. The only support my dad ever gave the business was there was a period where one of the banks wanted to withdraw a loan, and he secured that loan for us for 6 months until we got it moved over to HSBC. So we were kind of very determined to do the whole thing ourselves. So the only support was ever the short-term security on a loan until we moved it.
Quick one. We bring in 8 people a month to watch these conversations live here in the studio when we're here in the UK and when we're in LA. If you want to be one of those people, all you've got to do is hit subscribe. And then like going to your marketing thesis, because this is really what's defined Brewdog in the eye of the consumer. In the eye of someone like me that doesn't honestly drink beer, but knows about the brand and considers it to be a famous brand and watched it on LinkedIn and social media over the years build its sort of acclaim. What is your principles that underline your marketing thesis? Because your marketing thesis is very, very different to pretty much nearly all brands in this country. There's maybe a 0.1% that maybe have copied or that have been inspired, or that, chicken and egg, I don't know who came first, but it's a very unique thesis towards marketing. What underpins it?
We've got 2 very simple tests that we apply to everything that we do from a marketing perspective. So the first test is, would or could another business do this thing? And if the answer is yes, we've got to seriously consider why we're doing it. The second test is, if I spend £1 on this, is it going to give me a 10x return compared to how a competitor would spend that £1? So we are in an industry dominated by global behemoths of businesses who are hundreds of times our size, and we're closing that gap, and we want to close that gap, but we only close that gap by making our market and our communications, everything we do, work so much more effectively than theirs. If our marketing is only as effective as theirs, we don't close that gap and we lose. So the 2 tests are, could or would another company do this? And is it going to give me a 10x return versus how my competitor would spend that money?
And if I'm thinking about how to drive a better return on marketing, and then I think about what you've done, I see, well, we've got to be probably bolder to win share of voice. We've got to try and win headlines in more extreme ways, because nobody's going to be writing about you for the fun of it if you're a smaller sort of challenger brand. Then the second thing I think is kind of, we've got to do that on new platforms. We can't fight out on TV or in newspapers, because those are where you kind of throw huge amounts of money and you get return. So new platforms and new approaches. And that's very much kind of signifies what I've seen from Brewdog. Very, very bold.
Very bold and intentionally bold, and especially bold in our early years when we had no budget whatsoever. So the challenge was, how can we get our name out there with no money at all? So we had to do things that were intentionally provocative, that were on the edge, and sometimes we can cross that edge as well. But that enabled us to get our name, our message, our business out there with no budget at all. So we have driven a tank through the streets of London. We've thrown taxidermy cats out of a helicopter over the Bank of England. We've put Vladimir Putin in the front of a beer label. So we've done a lot of things, low budget, high impact, but we've tried to make it that everything we do ties back and is underpinned by what we're passionate about. So there has to be a connection there. So does this reinforce what we believe in, what we're trying to do as a company? Because otherwise it's just hollow and it's fake and it's false. So how does this reinforce the kind of core beliefs that drive this business? which is trying to build an alternative business, and a huge passion for fantastic beer.
One of the more extreme things, I saw the Vladimir
Yeah.
thing. What else have I seen? I think, to be fair, I think I've seen it all because I'm obviously a marketeer, and running a marketing company and seeking inspiration from lots of different brands and seeing what they're doing and the impact it's having, especially on social media, which was my battleground. The thing I read about more recently was that you put in a complaint about your own beer, which triggered press.
We did. So this was all the way back in 2008, and we had a few running battles with a few bigger players. One of them was the Portman Group. So the Portman Group was still is an industry regulator. And for me, it is a thinly veiled cartel funded by the big drinks businesses who've got a vested interest in making sure that small businesses are not successful. And there was a few rulings that they put out that were just so silly and frivolous that we wanted to make a statement. So we complained about one of our own beers to make a meta statement about how silly the process is and how essentially corrupt it was as an organization funded by the big beer companies, big drinks businesses who've got a vested interest in making sure the small ones are not successful.
How does that work? So you make a beer that is really high in AVB. Was that the correct term?
It was, yes. So we made a beer called Tokyo 18%. Now, if you looked at the newspaper headlines in the UK when we launched that beer, you would have thought that I was single-handedly responsible for the downfall of Western civilization by making an 18% beer. We had in the Sun binge drinking, blame this man, with like a cutout of my head in a bottle of Tokyo. That took a bit of explaining to my very religious grandmother, but that's another story. But everything we did with that beer was we just made 1,000 bottles. It was very expensive. It was for connoisseurs. It was for aficionados. And we want to elevate the status of beer. And I think the more someone can understand and appreciate something, the less likely they are to abuse it. And we make expensive products for people who love fantastic beer. So it was to kind of make a statement of, you've got all these big companies doing very cheap alcohol that's likely to be abused, trying to ban products of this company that's looking to elevate the status, increase education awareness around beer, and lead people to appreciate and enjoy beer in a more elevated way.
And when you see yourself in the sun with a cardboard cut out of your face, is that kind of swings and roundabouts? Is that good from a marketing perspective? Is that a good outcome? Because you were trying to get headlines. You complained about your own beer. Yeah. You were trying to get headlines. So is that job done?
I think in that one, to a certain extent, it was job done. And to kind of show you how odd things were back then. So this was kind of 2009, 2010, when we were starting to get momentum and the beer scene was starting to change. So the big companies had it their own way for way too long and things were starting to change. There was a award ceremony in Scotland in 2010, put together by the BII, the British Innkeepers Institute. And we got a heads up before the award ceremony. Hey guys, you're going to win the award for Scottish Bar Operator of the Year. So you guys better come to the award ceremony. So we went there, we booked a table. They were just about to announce it. I was like halfway up to the stage to get the award and they announced a different company. I was like, okay. But then the other company didn't want to take the award because our name was engraved in the trophy. It's like, well, we don't want it. So the next day I spoke to the person that organized the award ceremony. I was like, what happened? Like, you told us we were going to win. And he was like, well, Diageo, one of the world's biggest drinks companies, they were the main sponsor. They told me 5 minutes before we were due to give it to you, if they gave it to you guys, they was going to pull all future sponsorship.
You're joking.
So we felt we didn't have an option. So we put this online. It blew up. It was trending on Twitter globally that day. Diageo issued us a formal apology about the whole thing. That apology was in kind of broadcast news, but it just showed back then how the dynamic in the beer industry was changing and how the big beer companies and big drinks companies were acting towards that change, of which the Portman Group was one manifestation of it.
Did you take that personally?
I took that as a sign that we're doing the right thing. So I think unless other businesses are copying you or trying to knock you, then you're not doing well enough. So unless you're doing something that's worthy of people copying it, and like a lot of people moan, oh, I'm being copied. It's like, unless you're being copied, you need to up your game and you need to do better. Unless your competitors are trying to knock you down, you're not enough of a threat to your competition. So I took that as a sign that we're on the right track. We're doing the right thing. Let's keep going.
The other extreme marketing thing that I saw, which was when I first read it, I thought this is fucking hilarious, is the Elvis estate tried to copyright infringe you for calling your US beer, which I think is your most popular US beer.
It is Elvis Juice.
Elvis Juice.
Yeah.
They sent you a copyright statement, just sort of like basically a notice that you're violating the copyright.
Yes.
And you responded with some Elvis rhyme.
We did.
And on the LinkedIn post that I saw, it said you changed your name to Elvis.
Yeah.
Then the BBC come out and say that didn't happen.
Yeah.
What is the truth in this one? What did you change your name to Elvis?
Yeah, we did. And just to go kind of back in the story, so Elvis sent, not Elvis himself, Elvis's estate sent us a letter saying we couldn't use the name Elvis in a beer. And if we did, we had to pay them a license fee for every can, case and bottle of beer that we sold. So what myself and Martin did, we changed our names to Elvis and we sent them a letter back saying that they couldn't use our name on their music and they had to pay us a license fee for every time they played one of Elvis's songs. Got a huge amount of publicity at the time. We were both Elvis for a few weeks. Then we changed our names back. So the BBC attacked us on that, as they have on many things. However, the BBC misunderstood the Scottish procedure for changing a name. So they said we didn't change your name by deed poll. That's not a Scottish thing. In Scotland, you need an official declaration to change your name, which we did. So
what's that? Just signing a piece of paper?
You sign an official declaration piece of paper and that counts as a name change in Scotland.
And you don't even have to send it to anybody?
Don't have to send it to anyone in Scotland. So we met the Scottish requirements, which is what we said we did. But yeah, my grandmother was very unhappy and she insisted I change my name back to James. Brewdog's
marketing has been so bold and it's been so standout. And in terms of how hard in terms of the return on every dollar you've spent, it seems to have been a pretty astounding return per dollar spent because you've done these like big viral activations. A lot of them are like parodies, or they're like taking the piss out of big corporations, or they're sticking it to the man in various ways, or going at the incumbents in the industry. Some of them though, that even the example you gave there of they're complaining about your own beer
with the Portman Group. Yeah.
Obviously the complaint wasn't real.
Yeah.
Because it was you.
Because it was me.
What is the line between like truth in when you're doing these stunts and virality and untruth for you? And where do you play? Are you willing to do something that is, from a marketing perspective, that is not necessarily true, like complain about your own beer, if you believe it will help reach the outcome, which is to stick it to the Portman Group?
Yeah, well, I think with that one, it wasn't necessarily untrue because afterwards we said we made this complaint. So it was us who disclosed the fact that we made the complaint.
So you would trigger, okay.
And we disclosed that to just show how ridiculous the system was. Mm-hmm. So if we hadn't said it was us that complained about it, then I would accept that was being a bit dishonest. But the fact that we came out and we said, hey, the system fundamentally doesn't work, and we wanted to expose that by making this complaint was what we intended to do there.
When we first started talking about marketing, one of the things you said was we made a lot of mistakes.
Yeah.
Took things too far.
Yeah.
What did you take too far? In hindsight now that you're a big global brand and everyone is, looking back at all the steps when you weren't so big.
Yeah. I think the mistakes that we've made in marketing is when we've tried to do something which is on the edge or which is controversial, which needs explaining. So if you look at the thing in its totality, then it is potentially a positive thing. But if you only see a snapshot of it, then your takeaway from that could be negative. So I think a lot of the mistakes that we made from a marketing perspective, and we did some amazing things, but we did make some mistakes, was when we got too clever with the concept and the intention behind it, which was genuine, got lost. So a famous example of one of the mistakes that we made in marketing, for International Women's Day, we wanted to highlight the gender pay gap. This was a project that was put together by some of the fantastic women we've got in our business, and we made a beer called Pink IPA that we was going to sell 21% cheaper to women to highlight the gender pay gap, which was something that we felt passionate about. And then the proceeds from sale of that beer went to charities which help women and women's pay in the workplace and these kind of things. But then what happened was people just saw Pink IPA, and it looked like the beer itself was a parody of products which market themselves towards women, but then it just looked like another product that marketed itself toward women. And if anyone dug into it and understood, okay, this is to highlight the gender pay gap and they're doing some good with the money and they're taking a genuine cause, people just saw the Pink IPA, they saw the image and came to the conclusion that we're just doing the thing that we were going to fight against. And that was a key learning, that people just see a snapshot of a thing. So you need to make sure that all of the message that you want to land is in that snapshot, because a lot of people's not going to dig deeper into what it is.
What I got from that was that you've got to create a marketing campaign where the context is can't be separated.
Can't be separated, exactly.
Because it will be separated if it can be.
Exactly, 100%.
Yeah. Coming from being the captain of a boat to being the captain of Brewdog, quite literally, that is your job title at Brewdog.
That's my job title, yeah.
What adjustment was needed? Because on a boat, when you're up all night and there's men there and you've got to your screen. Give me a snapshot of what the crew are like on a boat, a trawler.
So a lot of my best friends to this day are the guys that I worked with on the fishing boats. But these are an unusual and interesting set of characters as well. It takes a certain type of person to kind of do that type of work and do that type of work on an ongoing basis. And I mean, they're hardworking, like to have fun, like to mess about a little bit, but all about the hard work. And especially when things get difficult, like seeing a good crew in a fishing boat come together and work hard to get them kind of through a tough time together was kind of really inspiring when it came to like business and leadership kind of later down the line.
I can see you being a very good captain on a boat. You and I just generally, you in the couple of moments, I didn't know you before you'd walked in the door, but in the couple of moments that I've been with you, you're very focused. And you're someone that I feel like, and I don't know you, but you feel very resilient. And then you add that to the fact that this is your business. And you said before, I think you said it in your book, that no one will ever love the business like you do.
No.
You being so hardworking, so out of balance in your own life as you've described, how do you not then have that expectation on others? Because this is something that I struggled with. I struggled with, especially in the early years of my business, was understanding that I was a bit fucked up. Do you know what I mean? And that, in fact, everyone else was normal, and that I needed to understand. It goes back to me saying about the dark side and the cost of my childhood and the insecurities. I was a bit fucked up. So how do you contend with that?
For the first 10 years of the business, I would say I contended with that very, very badly. So there's like a lot of intensity, there's a lot of drive, there's a lot of determination, there's a lot of passion there, and understanding how to lead people, how to take people with me on that journey has definitely evolved over time. And I'm now CEO of a business that's got 3,000 people. Before that, I maybe managed a handful of people in a fishing boat, but that is it. So to go from like no experience in being a CEO, no experience as being a leader, to managing 3,000 people at this speed and adding this, like this year, well, last 18 months cumulatively, we're going to add 1,000 people to the team. So it's like 1,000 amazing, well-paying jobs in a recession, which our country, which our economy needs. So we're expanding all the time, but just how steep that learning curve is to go from not managing anyone to managing 3,000 people with all the kind of stresses and strains of growing a business. And I think if I look back and reflect a little bit, we've definitely had challenges and well-documented challenges along the way. And we've had periods of such intense growth that we maybe haven't focused enough on our people and our culture during that period. And as a leader, I've always just been so focused on building something, on delivering exceptional value to our customer and making sure every time someone opens one of our beers or visits one of our bars, the experience is amazing. And knowing that if someone is choosing to spend their money with us, they're making a choice to do that versus one of our competitors. Therefore, we need to set the bar incredibly high and push incredibly hard. And as a leader, because of that drive, because of that determination, because of that focus, I've definitely pushed some of the team members too far in the past. And I think that's been well documented, but that came from a place of doing this because we want to build something amazing. And it took a bit of time to understand that, okay, they're as amazing as their team are, they don't have the same level of investment in the business as I do. Right. Some of them want to push it that hard. Some of them just don't. And for a while, there was just like, I'm going to run through this wall and I want everyone else to run through the wall as well. Not everyone's going to run through that wall. And again, a big lesson, and I've kind of reflected a lot in leadership in the last 12 months, is to take people with you, you've got to make them understand the why behind what you're doing. And my kind of first decade of a leader was like, we're doing this is what we're going to do, let's go. And what I've kind of found more recently is like, if people understand, okay, we're doing this, but this is why, this is what it means for you, this is what it means for the business, this is why it's a fantastic thing, this is why it's going to help us achieve objectives where everyone's going to win together, it's much easier to take people with you on that journey. Whereas in the first 10 years, I was just like, go.
Interesting. That's such an important lesson. Because, in the example you gave there, in one hand, you're like dragging people, and all studies show across all industries that when people don't go voluntarily, it's burnout, it's pressure, it's stress, it's, and then when what you said there is leadership is in fact inspiring them to come with you. Yeah. And when it's voluntary, in terms of they know why they're going and they want to go, then all the psychological implications across multiple studies that I've read about are significantly improved. You said you've been on a leadership evolution.
I have.
So speaking honestly, what has that evolution been from when you started as a leader and the business starts to explode to the person that sits here in front of me today? What have you had to work on and remove?
So it absolutely still is a journey, and I absolutely believe that I can get better as a leader. And I think one of the most important things that I've done in the last 12 months, we appointed an amazing independent non-exec chairman in Alan Layton, who's run some fantastic businesses, so much experience. So having someone there who's like a mentor to me, because like if I hang out with my buddies, they want to speak about football and golf and that kind of stuff. They don't want, hey, I've got this kind of leadership challenge. It's like they don't care, which is amazing. But then being a CEO is a very, very lonely job at times. And like incredibly lonely. And there's another quote that I love from Ben Horowitz, the author of one of my favorite business books. And it's like the first rule of CEO psychological meltdown is not to speak about CEO psychological meltdown. So I think people don't realize like being a CEO is fantastic, but it's lonely. It's intense. It's difficult. So having Alan's kind of help and guidance through that journey, I think is really important. And I would say in the early years of the business, I managed it like a captain would manage a small team in a fishing boat. Whereas now I'm looking to evolve my leadership style into a CEO of a kind of medium to large company, which is a bit less intense, which is maybe a bit less demanding, but which is more about taking our people with us on this journey. So here's we're going to do this, and it might be tough, but this is what it means for us as a business. This is why we're doing it. But then also making sure that incentives are very much aligned, making sure that, okay, we want to create a business model where we win together as a company, which I think is really powerful. And we've always wanted to build a radically different type of business, a business that rejected how things were done and what big business was as usual. And that's been key. And I think if you look at, we're community owned, we're the world's first carbon negative beer business. And the new things that we've launched with our people, it makes us a fundamentally and radically different business. So we've recently launched the Blueprint, which is, I think, the biggest, most important announcement in the history of our business. So firstly, I decided to give almost £100 million of my own equity in the business to the team. So it's over the next 4 years, but that means each salaried team member receives £120,000 worth of equity. And that's in the valuation today. So if we double in size, then that could be significantly more. And that's about recognizing like we are all in this together. We want to win together. We want to work hard to win together. And it's about incentivizing our team to act like business owners, but rewarding them like business owners. The second part of that was we wanted to create a completely new model for how a hospitality business works. So we've got over 100 amazing hospitality venues all over the planet. Each of our bars now share 50% of the profits with the team that work there. So it's a whole new model where if you visit one of our bars in Tokyo, in Berlin, in Cleveland, in Australia, you know that, okay, half of the profit that this bar makes is shared with amazing people that put this experience together. So we want to kind of elevate the standard of hospitality, elevate the standards of kind of careers within hospitality. We've always been a real living wage employer, which has been very important for us. But sharing 50% of the profits with our team, I think helps us attract and retain fantastic people. I think it's something that's going to resonate with our customers. And I think it's something that's going to help us elevate the hospitality experience for consumers. And consumers are ultimately the thing which drives our business.
That's the thing. The first point was like inspiring people to come with you as opposed to dragging them, which again, many CEOs, many leaders fall into the trap of doing that because we are so blinded by our own mission that we forget to communicate it and bring other people along. But the second thing you touched on there is if we sometimes CEOs sit here, and I've probably been guilty of this. You said you've been guilty of this. It's like looking at the team that you've built and maybe questioning at times why they're not moving with the same energy that you are, but they're not incentivized to. They're not going to be 100 millionaire, gazillionaire if this all works out. They are getting their remuneration regardless of outcome. So the second piece that I've garnered from that of leadership is also to align incentives. And if you want someone to act like an owner, you have to make them an owner. Which it seems like common sense, but it's not so common.
It's not so common. It took us a while to get there, but that is exactly it. Like we've got reasonably high expectations of our team. We like to push hard. We're in an industry dominated by companies much bigger than ours. So we need to be in our A game. We need to push things as a business, but we need to recognize the hard work that hundreds and thousands of people put into our business every single day. They're the people that make the beer, that deliver the beer, that make the magic happen for the customer. And I want their incentives to be as aligned as my own. And I want them to feel as much ownership as I do. And I want them to share intrinsically in the success of the business. But hopefully by doing this, we can create a new business model that in a few years' time, I can then sit down with other CEOs and, okay, like we've invested in our people this way, but we've become a better business because of it. And then do other businesses then decide to do the same thing? Is it maybe normal in 5 years' time for every hospitality business to share 50% of their profits with the people at work in their site? And if that happens, then we haven't only made the lives better for the people at work in our business, but we've managed to fundamentally change our industry, which would be really cool.
A lot of successful businesses in the country, I'm thinking of the Ben Francis, I'm thinking of the Hewells, hashtag ad, just in case the ASA come for me. A lot of business owners that have gone through extremely high growth, and I've sat here with those CEOs of those companies, they get out of the way.
Yeah.
They realize, especially in your case, because this was your first shot at business,
This is my first shot, yeah.
So you're going to fuck up. Like many
many
times. I fucked up a lot as well, hugely, over and over again, and still today. But they get out of the way. So Ben Francis stepped down as CEO when there was 30 people. The founder of Huel, Julian, stepped out of the CEO role and put someone in. Did that ever cross your mind, and why didn't you do that sooner? If you knew that because learning on the job when you got 2,000 people is a high risk.
It's a high risk thing. So I'm very passionate about being CEO, and it's something I want to continue doing for the foreseeable future. And
why?
Because I think we're only just starting. So a question that I get asked a lot when I speak to the media is like, how do you feel about what you've done, what you've built, what you've achieved so far? And I wouldn't say the feeling is quite as numb as indifference, but it's close to that.
Really?
Yeah. And for me, what is exciting is, where can we take this from here? So we want to build one of the world's best beer companies. We want to build one of the world's best companies overall. I look at companies like Whole Foods or Tesla or Google or Amazon or Starbucks. I mean, that is the scale of the ambition. We want to do what they've done in their industry for beer. So what I'm insanely excited about is, okay, we've given ourselves a platform. We've now got over 3,000 staff. We now make beer in 4 continents. We've now got over 100 locations. We've got significant sales momentum. Where can we take this from here? And I think what we've done so far gives us an opportunity to do something meaningful, to do something impactful, to do something that enriches the lives of our customers, to do something that helps us save the planet and fly the flag for sustainability, something that helps us look after our team members even better, but helps us have a huge impact. And what I'm very excited about is, okay, what can we do as a team, as a company, as a collective, as a community over the next 5 to 10 years? That's what I'm focused on. That's why I get out of bed in the morning. And that's what I'm really excited to continue doing with the fantastic management team and team that we've got in the business.
I was startled when you said it, indifference. You genuinely, the way that you feel about what you've achieved so far is quite close to indifference, kind of just numb or like just meh. Honestly.
It's close to indifference. So we've done some fantastic things, but overall, we're still relatively small in the overall scheme of things. I'm like, in terms of like, if I spend like maybe 5% of my time thinking, okay, this is good, 95% of it is okay. In the next 12 months, we can open our fantastic site in Vegas. We can plant millions of trees in the Lost Forest in Scotland. We can reduce our carbon emissions. We can launch some fantastic new beers that our customers are going to love. We can open 50 new locations in India. We can continue investing in our people. We can make the profit share thing amazing. We can try and make sure that the equity that our people have in our team is as valuable as possible. We can continue expanding our German business.
Biggest beer brewery, aren't you?
16th most valuable
16th.
beer brand, yeah.
So in 2007, if I'd gone, when you were doing, you'd taken that 20K loan from the bank, and I'd gone and seen you in Dickey, and I said, listen, a couple of years' time, you're going to be the 16th largest brewery in the world, and you're going to have thousands of staff all around the world and 111 locations, whatever it is. You're going to be opening a thing in Vegas. You would have, and I said, how do you think you're going to feel on that day? What would you have said to me?
Well, I think there's 2 answers to that question. So one answer is the answer that I would usually give to the media, which is like, if you go back to 2007 and now you've built this, could you have envisaged it? Could you have imagined it? And the answer that you've kind of got to give to the media, because anything else sounds too self-assured. No, I could never have imagined it. It's been amazing. But the answer that I don't usually share is, of course I imagined it, because if me and Martin didn't imagine it, how can we build it? How can we make it a real thing if it wasn't something we're kind of planning to do or planning to build? So I think if you went back and asked me that question there, I would have been very excited about the journey and the joy of building something.
But if I said, how would you feel today? I'm speaking to 2007 James and Dickey.
Okay.
and I'm saying, by the way, look at this. This is where you get to in 2022.
Yeah.
You would. I'm guessing you would assume that on that day in 2022, you would be really content.
Yes.
But you're clearly not. You're not content, are you? Because you're saying that. Yeah. You're saying you're indifferent.
Yeah. No. If you'd asked me that then, I would. Yeah. I'm going to like spend half of my time in the office, half of my time traveling, and then just chill. Whereas what I'm doing at the moment is the exact opposite of that. And what I'm focused on is, okay, where do we take this thing from here? Can we make a real difference? Can we create the world's first top 10 beer business for over a century? And that's an exciting challenge.
I've come to learn from doing this podcast that we almost need to make goals that can never be completed for that very reason. And so words like better, like we'll make Brewdog better, is a much more useful word than we'll become number one. Because when you become number one, there's nowhere to go from there, and it's an anticlimax.
Well, down.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a real anticlimax about reaching these peaks. So it's almost like trying to climb a mountain where there is no peak, and that's ultimately life. And then you die somewhere along the journey. But that kind of goes against the trend of like goal setting and what's your goal and what's your 5-year plan, and this kind of underlying assumption that finish lines will make us euphoric. Have you experienced that? That's kind of why I was asking the question about 2007.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess the closest thing we've had to a finish line is in 2017, we took a big investment in our company. The company was valued at just over $1 billion. So one of my things was always like, let's see if you can build a unicorn. So unicorns are startup companies which get to be valued over $1 billion, called unicorns because they're so rare. There's so few of them that happen in the UK and especially in Scotland. And I always thought, okay, if there was ever something that would make me feel, okay, I've accomplished that thing, I've done that thing, I'm complete, happy, content, it would be, okay, build a unicorn. Like that, for me, that was my win an Oscar, score a winning goal in a World Cup final. But like, for me, that was build a unicorn. And then the next day I was just like, okay, let's go. Where do we go from here?
That was your first big sort of cash windfall personally, because some money went into the company, some money went to the founders,
yes.
sold shares.
Yes.
So that was your first big dealings with being a cash millionaire.
Yes. And a fun story from that. So the money came in to myself and Martin, and I had Bethany, so it was like well into the tens of millions. I had Bethany, my amazing assistant, transfer it from the lawyer's account into my bank account. For some reason, there was a typo in the account numbers. It went to somewhere in Russia. The money was lost for 4 days. At a point in time, we thought the money wasn't going to come back. So I went from the euphoria of, okay, I've built a unicorn, I've got a huge check in my bank account, to where the fuck is the money? What am I going to do? What am I going to do now? So in the 5th day, the boss of the boss of the boss of the person managed to find a way to get the money back, and we got the money back. But for the 5 days after the deal, the money was missing, presumed lost, presumed never coming back.
Russia, what a place to send it.
Yeah, the sort code sent it to a bank in St. Petersburg, and they were like, well, the bank might not even want to send it back. I was like, okay.
Oh my God.
So now double, triple check every sort code that I send cash to.
What was that day? What was that like emotionally? That was what you were aiming for in many respects in terms of financial freedom. What was it like?
And maybe it's a theme of people you have on here, but often when you get to where you think is the thing that's going to make you happy, a couple of days, and then your reality is almost the same. The demons are there, the challenges are there, the opportunity is there. But with people I've spoke to as well, it's never just this euphoric moment where you sail into the sunset and live happily ever after. It's a bit of a celebration, a bit of a kind of quietening of the voices of the head for a few days, and then go again.
When you say the demons, what do you mean?
That inadequacy complex, like you're not good enough, you're never going to manage to build a business. This business is going to go nowhere. You're going to be a failure. You're going to be back in a fishing boat. You should have listened to everyone who told you not to set up the business. They were right. They told you it was a bad idea.
Who put that voice in your head?
I think a combination of early childhood, potentially partly parents, despite being well-intentioned. There was a story from my childhood where I've been obsessed with sharks my entire life. So my favorite hobby is to go diving with sharks. It's like, I'm happiest when I'm under the water with sharks. I recently went to Guadalupe Island off the coast of Mexico, dived with some great white sharks. So like being under the water with sharks is my happy place. And when I was a kid, I would always tell people when they asked me what I want to be a marine biologist. I want to study sharks. And when I was 8 or 9 years old, my parents told me to go and get my shark book. I was like, wow, okay, they're finally interested in something that I love. So pajamas on just before bedtime, went to my bedroom, come through with a shark book. Mother opened up the shark book and went through the 4 authors in the shark book and was like, James, look, this person PhD, this person PhD, this person PhD. They've all got PhDs. It's just not something you're going to be able to do. So you need to stop telling people you want to be a marine biologist. You need to stop telling people you're going to study sharks because you just won't manage to get a PhD. So you need to think of something else. And I just remember not saying anything, taking my shark book and just like walking back to my bedroom in tears and like, okay, no more sharks, James.
Have you ever forgiven your mother for the way that she was?
Don't think so.
You don't?
But I think there was a lot of incidents like that, and that's where that voice comes from. And I mean, the voice is very much part of me, and I think it's helped me push too hard at times. It's helped me do some fantastic things, but I mean, it's always there. And after that big deal, it was like, okay, you've done that, but now unless you can do this, then that voice starts up again.
Yeah, I worry about that a little bit because, yeah. Why don't you think you've forgiven her?
There was a lot of other things that happened subsequently. Ended up in a messy court case with my father, and I just didn't want anything to do with it. I was like, this is your thing. Sometimes people don't get on. Fine, just sort it out. It's not my thing. And she called me as a witness in the court case, which meant I had to sit there for 5 days in the court of session in Edinburgh. And this was when I was studying law in the court of session with some of the students I was studying with, watching the case. And I was like sitting there waiting to be called. And I don't think she'd ever had any intention of calling me. And somehow she just wanted to subject me to the pantomime that was playing out that I didn't want any part of. And I was forced to sit there and watch it, which was tough.
When people talk about forgiveness, they always say that it's a process of like letting a prisoner go and realizing you were the prisoner the whole time. Another question. I mean, I was going to ask: do you think you've healed from it? But you've just said that you still have that voice today.
Yeah, but on some level, maybe I want that voice.
Interesting.
So maybe it's like, well, if you lose that voice, are you going to be able to do these things? Is the voice the thing that makes you able to build a business with your best friend from scratch to what we've built?
But isn't that what
today?
The voice would say?
That is what the voice would say.
The voice values validation. It's desperately seeking validation. So of course the voice would say, what if you lose me? Then you'll lose, then you won't be validated anymore. And validation is so important to us. This is a really interesting topic that this was the last chapter in my book, and I actually didn't know. I knew what I wanted to try and get to, but I didn't know what the answer was until I started writing. And it's this whole idea of feeling if you're enough yet. Do you feel like you're enough yet? And I thought that the reason why I was ambitious was because I didn't feel like I was enough. So it was this driving force. But in fact, I came to learn that because I didn't feel like I was enough, I had fake ambitions. I wanted a Lamborghini and to impress people. These were never my ambitions. And the closer I got to feeling like I was enough, my ambitions changed. I still had ambitions. I didn't lose ambition, but they became intrinsically driven ambitions. Like I want to have a wife. And I want to do things like a podcast where it doesn't pay a shit ton of money. It's not the best financial use of my time, but it's an intrinsically driven thing. And so maybe your ambitions will change, but you'll be happy with the change.
I think that's a great point. And I love your book, by the way. And I've actually highlighted a few. Yeah, I loved it. I highlighted a few points in that section. And I think at the moment, ambition are things that can be measured objectively, because that objective measurement helps that voice. But at the same time, you're right. The voice is like, well, if you lose me, you're going to lose your edge. And what makes you able to do all these things. And
has that voice changed over the years with your success at all?
No,
not at all.
It just moves the goalpost every time.
Really
moves the goalpost. Achieve it, goalpost move.
No change at all in that voice. Fucking hell.
No.
That explains a lot, to be fair, because you've really been hell for leather with your business. I had a few words to say about one of my sponsors on this podcast. A small business in the UK is successfully hacked every 19 seconds. If you're a small business owner right now, my advice to you would be to prepare for the worst so you can mitigate the risk of that happening to you. And that's why I've partnered with Vodafone Business and their V-Hub. They break down complex issues with cybersecurity so that you can get the knowledge you need to adapt. You'll find a range of information, support and solutions which demonstrate in the simplest way possible what you need to do and what you need to know when it comes to keeping your business safe. Not only that, but you can speak to one-on-one V-Hub digital advisors right now about your business for free. To find out more, search V-Hub by Vodafone. So one of the things you announced, which you talked about earlier, is this new manifesto for your business called the Brewdog Blueprint, creating the business of tomorrow. And this is kind of the late stage vision for a much more sustainable company. Yes. When I say sustainable, I'm talking not about carbon emissions. I'm talking about a company where your team and your mission can be achieved in a sustainable, holistically sustainable way. You've had a lot of controversy over the last 2 years.
I don't just think over the last 2 years. I think controversies followed us almost every year since 2008.
And much of that you've actually welcomed. You've tried to get controversy. It's been central to your marketing strategy. And it's actually, from my estimation, especially in those early years, served you tremendously well because it's made the marketing dollar work a lot harder. The controversy in more recent years starts with this Punks with Purpose letter that was written. 300 of your ex-employees and some of your current employees at the time, and think in 2020 or 2021?
2021. Came
out with these allegations of bullying, lying, fear, toxic workplace culture, unfair dismissals, all of this stuff. When people hear about the Blue Dog Blueprint, they might think it's a knee-jerk response to that. And that without that moment where, you know, those employees had written that letter about their experience at Brewdog, you wouldn't have gone on the journey and published that new vision for Brewdog. What do you say to that?
I would say that's completely not the case. Firstly, let me speak about how we've been as employers. So I think it's completely fair to say there's been points on the high growth journey of this company where we could have done more to look after the people. As a first-time CEO leading a company that was expanding super rapidly in the US, in Germany, in the UK, at times we didn't invest enough in HR. We had unrealistic expectations of our team. And I think a fair amount of feedback in that letter was valid. So we've always wanted to be the best employer we can be. The aspiration has always been to be a fantastic place to work. And we've always believed that our long-term destiny is determined by how well we look after the fantastic people in our business. And I think that has been core to our DNA since day one. Have we always lived up to that in the high growth periods? No, we haven't. And I think we fully accept that. And off the back of that feedback, we did a full independent review of culture. We spoke to over 1,000 people inside and outside the company, and we made a whole host of changes. We invested in HR. We put a pay increase in place across the board. We added resource where we felt we were under-resourced as a company. We put in place an independently managed ethics hotline and loads of other things. I think we had a few years where we missed the mark from a people perspective. High growth, inexperience in my behalf, unrealistic expectations, difficulties in COVID. I think we've reset things now. I think we've put some fantastic things in place. And then on top of that, we've launched the Blueprint, which I think helps create a whole new model for business going forward, which is something we're very excited to do.
When that letter came out from Punks with Purpose that day, talk me through what it's like to be a CEO when 300 people sign a letter accusing you of all these making these allegations about toxic company work culture. What's it like for you that day?
It's hell. It's I mean, this is my life's work, and some of that feedback was fair and valid. I think some of the feedback was disingenuous, but we took the approach of whether we agree with it or not, we're going to use this as an opportunity to get better. And maybe in 2, 3, 4 years' time, we can look back and say, as difficult as this was, we've become a better company because of it. How can we engage with this and how can we use it to get better? Because ultimately, our people are the most important thing in our business, and we want to be the best business we can long term. And we've just got to use it as a catalyst for getting better long term as a business.
What did you think was fair?
I think it's completely fair to say that I, at times in the journey, have been too intense, that I have been too demanding, that I have set standards for the team, which I would set for myself, but then for a lot of the team members, that is unattainable. And I fell into the trap of picking bits and pieces from some of my favorite business leaders' philosophies. So Jeff Bezos has got a philosophy that standards need to be unreasonably high, and unless people think they're unreasonably high, they're not high enough. and I would just pick bits and pieces without kind of taking maybe the whole philosophy. And I just pushed for such high standards, unrealistic deadlines. And it was because I was so focused on, let's build a thing, let's create more jobs, let's create more progression opportunities for our team, let's deliver more value for our customers, let's create amazing moments of customer magic, let's continue building. So the intention was 100% good. And because I was so bought in and so focused on that, I did push people too far.
What was the most hurtful thing that you read? So that letter came out, the BBC did a documentary, the BBC did this podcast, which is kind of just the same as the documentary. What was the most hurtful thing that you read written about yourself?
Well, I think for me, there's the difference between, okay, this is genuine feedback because people had a valid concern and because people want to help make us a better business, which fully accept, want to listen to that feedback all day long with us. There's been, unfortunately, two things mixed together. So there's been the valid feedback, which we listen to, which we accept, which we want to become a bit better business. There's also been people who have been on a mission to inflict as much damage as they can on me and on the business, with mistruths, with misrepresentations, with dishonest statements and dishonest claims. And I know a lot of these individuals. And unfortunately, I can't say too much at the moment because there's 2 ongoing court cases, but there's been a large amount of criminality involved in this as well. And hopefully one day I'm able to speak about it, but some of the things that's happened in the background are completely shocking. It's almost like a movie plot. So you've got the kind of 2 things mixed up in our case. You've got valid feedback from ex-employees about, okay, you could have done better here. You didn't invest enough in HR. These things were difficult that we fully hear. And the other side, you've got people taking advantage of that moment just to try and inflict damage in me and the company for whatever reason. We've always had haters as a business as well, perhaps more than any other business. And I always felt to have people hate you, you need to be successful doing something that you love. And I think there's a big difference here. And you spend some time in the US between how US people relate to successful business people and how UK people relate to successful business people. And I think in the US, they cheer you on from the sidelines. They support you because their mindset is they think that can be them someday. Whereas in the UK, I think it's maybe a bit more jealous of success and they don't think it's going to be them. So therefore they're jealous in success, which I think is a bit to play there as well. So yes, some of the elements of feedback that I felt wasn't coming from a genuine place were some of the kind of hardest to hear. Whereas the other bits of feedback that was fair and genuine, I was there for all day long, but the disingenuine bits of feedback were tough because they just all get reported the same way in the media.
Fair and genuine feedback then. So one of the things that you actually do at your company and you were doing during this growth period is doing the old net promoter score thing. One of the things the BBC reported on. Yeah. In your head office, the score for when people were asked the question, how likely are you to recommend Brewdog as a good place to work, was minus 54%. And then company-wide, the score was minus 18%.
Yes.
How does one, because that's just a number.
Yes.
How does one go about getting the context of that number and then improving the number? Because if I got that number, I wouldn't know where to bloody start.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I would start with surveys, but it's a difficult thing to change, right? Because it's an awful number, you know?
Yeah, and I don't think you can change it based on a number. And I think the mistake that we maybe made in the past was when we knew we had an issue with our culture, we tried to fix those issues in a vacuum. So it would be me and a couple of our senior leaders, and okay, we know we've got this issue here. We want to make it better for our people. Let's do this, this, and this. But we create that in a vacuum and we didn't speak to the people. So we did so many well-intentioned things that we thought was really going to help us as an employer that just didn't help. So one of the biggest learnings on that part of the journey for me, and it's really kind of came to fruition with the blueprint, is if we're trying to do something that's good for our people, let's build it with our people. Let's not build it in isolation. Let's not make it in a vacuum. So the blueprint, for instance, before we launched it, I did focus groups extensively with cross sections of the company in America, junior people, senior people, middle managers. I did the same for our retail business, for our production business. I did face-to-face workshops on it. It's like, here's what we're thinking about doing in terms of making things better for you guys. What do you think? This is going to impact you on a day-to-day basis. How do you think this is going to go down the team? But ultimately, how can we make this better? And in the past, the blueprint, I would have just launched it in a vacuum with good intention. We made so many changes to how it works based on the feedback from our team. So we ultimately ended up launching something that was far more impactful, that was far better for our team because we built it in a fundamentally different way than we would have built it before, which is just in isolation. And I think that's the first example of us doing that and me doing that as a leader, which I think is a really important evolution of my leadership style within the business.
The other thing you've done, which I implore all companies to do, is as part of your Brewdog blueprint, when I went on the website, I saw that you've got that transparency dashboard.
Yes.
This is very important in the modern world, because this puts the power of truth into your hands in terms of reality. So what you've done is you've published on your website things like your employee sort of satisfaction score, things relating to your carbon emissions and all these things, so that the world can now see what your own team think of being a Brewdog employee. Because what that also does for the team is it builds trust.
It does, and I think it's such an important part of our philosophy, and it just got to a point where there were so many misrepresentations that was like, okay, let's just give them the facts in their purest, most undiluted form, and then people can make up their own mind. So if you look at this transparency dashboard at the moment, the latest score that we've got from people within our business is 3.49 out of 5 as an employer. Now, do we want to be 3.49 out of 5 as an employer? No. Is that significantly better than most people outside the company would have you think? Yes. But what we've committed to doing is every 12 months, we're going to do the same survey in the same way, and we're going to update people. So we're going to do that at the end of this year, and we are going to share those results so people can see, okay, you've done some things. Are you now better or worse than a 3.49 in an anonymous survey from your people? And that's a level of transparency we've committed to here. And I think that commitment to transparency isn't something new in our business. In 2014, we launched something called DIY Dog. So with DIY Dog, we gave away the beer recipe in full for every single beer we'd ever made. So at the time, it was 250 recipes. So it was the keys to our kingdom. It was everything that most companies usually kind of keep away, kind of in some secret vault somewhere and like loath to share with anyone. But that transparency has been kind of hardwired into our DNA for a long time. And this transparency dashboard, specifically focusing on culture, people, headcount, employer score, is a key evolution of that.
And obviously, if you're doing surveys of your team, people are always going to fear reprisal, which is, if I write something bad on this, am I going to get fired or something? Is it anonymous?
It's 100% anonymous, and it's managed by an independent third party.
Oh, good.
Which lets us get the purest, most undiluted, fair, objective feedback we can. I'm reading through the BBC reports, and I'm listening to the podcast. I like to do my research. So I watched the documentary. I listened to all six and a half parts of the podcast. The bit where my skin really was just, I felt really uncomfortable, was when a certain member of the team, I think in an American bar, talked about the interview process for promotion. And someone, I think her manager had said to her, had asked her continually, does she have kids? Is she going to get married? When you heard that a member of the Brewdog team was being repeatedly questioned on whether they had kids when they were interviewing for promotion, were you as horrified as I was? I was massively, massively horrified. Here, I was massively horrified for two reasons. A, that it happened, and B, because I know it's my fault. So every single thing that happens in this business is a direct consequence of something I have done. So if something goes wrong anywhere in the business, in a business with 3,000 people, things are going to go wrong all the time in every different country, like all the time. But I can never, ever blame anyone but myself, because I've either hired that person, set the tone for the culture, instructed that person, communicated with that person, communicated with their manager. So it's all a direct consequence. So when we've got an issue, I can't look at anyone but myself, and I've got to take full responsibility for that issue and putting things in place to fix that issue. So it was hard to hear, because it's something that should absolutely never happen, but also hard to hear because if I'd done my job better, then it just wouldn't have happened in the first place.
Is that an evolution, that perspective?
That evolution is a perspective as well. Before, if something went wrong and I mean, this is a steep learning curve. Before, if something went wrong in the company, blame someone else. Yeah. And by blaming someone else, you just don't address what the issue is, and then you scapegoat someone else, which is bad from a culture perspective, when now it's back to the question, okay, what could I have done to ensure that didn't happen? What can I do to avoid that going forward? What can I do to make the team, the culture, the people as strong as I can going forward, so we can be the best representation of this company and build it to how we want it to be?
Well, there's one of the trends that was very obvious in this documentary was, because I assume the brewery industry is male dominated.
Yes.
Women that get jobs in the industry are at risk of getting swept up in a male culture. and being the victims of a male culture in many respects. There was the story in the podcast about someone in a brewery or something doing a masturbation gesture at a female employee. This goes back to a masculine culture issue, kind of the kind of culture you would expect in a football locker room, but wouldn't ever. Yeah. Is this the systemic sort of uprooting that you've had to think about? Because 3,000 people around the world, you have to protect all of them.
I do.
You have to protect all of them from each other.
Yeah.
That's not.
Yeah.
How does one go about that? Is that a culture, philosophy thing? How do you stop? And how do you, when someone goes to report something like that, that horrific incident, what? Yeah.
So again, we've put in place loads of things. So now we've got an independent ethics hotline, which is independently managed. So there's so many ways now for people to report something they're concerned with. They can speak to their line manager, they can speak to the HR department, or if they want to do it completely anonymously, we've got this independently managed hotline. They can call that hotline that then gives the feedback to our directors, to our HR department, but it's completely anonymized, so they don't know who that feedback is coming from. And for us, like, we want to build the most diverse, most inclusive business that we can. I think it's fundamentally important that we are as diverse and inclusive as our customer base is as well. We've now got a diversity and inclusion forum within the business with people from all over the business where they discuss things. Okay, we can get better at this, we can get better at that. So it's putting more things in place where we listen to a huge cross section of our team. And whereas before we've been, okay, we're building a thing, and the team are helping us build a thing. It's okay, let's build a thing together with our team, because the person who is on the front lines in our bar in Columbus, Ohio, or our bar in central London, or our bar in Edinburgh, or the person who's working in the warehouse in Glasgow or in the brewery in Australia, their perspective on things is so important. And I think a trap that I fell into was, okay, this is our culture because this is what I say it is. You can't say what a culture is. The culture is how the people in your team feel and then how they act. And you only build that together. So for me, it's been another key learning. Let's build the culture together with our team. And that's going to give us the strongest culture that we can. Has the culture always been amazing in the past? No, hands up, it hasn't. Can we make a fantastic culture together in the future with our team? I fully believe we can, and we're very much focused on that.
You've got 2 young daughters.
I do.
So when you hear about, when you hear these incidents that have come from women saying that they've experienced someone being misogynistic to them, that must hit closer to home than most.
It absolutely does. So I'm super lucky to have 2 amazing daughters. They're 8 and 5.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The eldest one is sometimes makes beer with me at home in the kitchen on a Saturday afternoon, which is...
At 5? Does she drink it?
No, she doesn't drink it. She smells it and she picks out the hops and she picks out the malt, and then she designs a label and she gives it to...
That'd be another documentary, wouldn't it?
So friends who are allowed to drink it and stuff. But yeah, I mean, it's stuff. I mean, the outside of the business, I mean, my daughter's the most important thing in my life, full stop, and the main focus of my life outside the business. And I think being a father has changed my view on a lot of things. I mean, it's not just since myself and Martin became fathers that there suddenly became baby changing facilities in all of our venues and that kind of thing. But in a kind of deeper level, a lot of what we're doing from a sustainability perspective is because I want to be able to look my kids in the eye and know that we did our bit to save our home planet, that this didn't happen in our watch, that we put things in the line here. And then in terms of the culture we're building as a company as well, I want to be able to, when they've grown up, speak to our daughters about, okay, we try to make it amazing for everyone by doing these things. This is the values that we held true to us. Did we always get it right? No. Was the intention always there to do that? Absolutely. And this is where we got to in that journey.
One of the things you said, I fucked up on this particular point, was investing in Heineken. And you've explained many times, the thesis behind that and why you did that. But I know people were talking, and you responded with some things yesterday about that. But I just wanted to kind of confront that. So you've obviously been the antithesis of those big
we have
beer companies. And then the BBC reported that you'd actually invested.
I did.
They said 500 grand. You say 120K.
Yeah.
Context.
So they said I held 500K's worth of shares. I invested 500K. I quickly sold it down. Okay. So at the time they said it was 500K.
Why are you investing in the people you hate?
Keep your friends close, your enemies closer. No, so at that time, and it's the most stupid thing that I've ever done. If I could go back and change a single thing, that would be very high on the list, just because of how at odds it sits with our values and how we do things as a company. So the intention was to try and do a distribution deal. Heineken felt that we hated them. I then, without thinking about it too much, decided, okay, well, I'm going to buy this. And like, hey guys, I can't hate you too much because I've got shares in it. So that was the kind of design and concept behind it. And whilst we don't want to be owned by big beer business, we do distribution deals with them. We've done a distribution deal with Asahi in Japan, and we work with other big beer companies on a distribution basis, but not an ownership basis. I naively felt it would help us get a distribution deal done. We didn't get the distribution deal done, and yeah, definitely one of the most stupid things I've ever done. I would love to go back and take it back, but I did it. I own shares in Heineken, which is kind of like, I don't know, Luke Skywalker owning shares in Darth Vader's latest startup.
Were you, the last question I have on that topic then, on these topics more just generally, is the other thing that the BBC alleged was that you were going to sell your company to Heineken.
Yeah. No truth in that whatsoever. So we had discussions about distribution, about potential partnerships, but there was never any intention to sell the company. And if we wanted to sell this company, we would have sold it a long time ago. So we have had so many offers.
Why not? Why not sell it? That'd be a big payday.
Yeah, but then the week after, what do you do? How am I going to spend my time? What am I passionate about? Let's start another beer business and then build it. Let's start another company and build it. So like if we had wanted to sell, we could have sold this thing at a huge valuation 100 times over. I could be sitting in a yacht somewhere sipping margaritas and never have to worry about anything ever again. So if we wanted to sell, we would have sold it. It was never the intention to sell it. It was to see, is there an opportunity to work together strategically or in distribution that helps us grow the business? But we're fully committed to... We're 15 years in, we're fully committed to the next 15 years and seeing where we can take this thing. And that's the fun and that's the challenge and that's what we're focused on.
When you don't do many interviews.
I don't.
I think you've probably been a little bit too busy with COVID and everything else going on. So you've not really done any interviews, but you did one in the Sunday Times with Josh Glancy.
Yeah.
And his sort of conclusive point in that interview was that he thought you were obsessive, someone who clearly struggles to express empathy or read social cues. He's cold-eyed, unsettling company, and is as a determined person as I recall meeting. And then he goes on to say that, but he doesn't think you are the person that you've been portrayed to be in a negative context.
Yeah,
or words to that effect. But the bit that I found particularly interesting of all of that was the part about social cues, which you've mentioned earlier in this conversation.
Yeah. So actually, off the back of the time that I spent with Josh and looking at that feedback, I started exploring as to whether I am a little bit autistic, and it's still something I'm exploring at the moment, but working with some specialists, I think I might have some kind of light level autism in the mix that would explain some of the social cue thing, some of the mindset thing, and some of the awkwardness as well.
Interesting. 39 years old, that's a bit... late.
Because of that exact quote.
Really?
Because of that exact quote. And I was like chatting with my doctor and I was like, do you think this may? And she's like, I thought that for a while, James, quite possibly. So yeah, I'm working with a specialist at the moment to see if there's a diagnosis there or not, but it's something we're looking at, but based on that exact quote, which is very spooky that you read it out just now.
Well, it's because you said about social cues at the start of the conversation, and then I'd seen him say that, and I'm putting two and two together. And generally, when I was reading about all the BBC stuff and all a lot of the sort of accusations and allegations, much of it felt like sometimes you would stare at people and you'd be a bit socially awkward.
Yeah.
So and that can be, for a lot of people, I'm saying this is part of it, that can be quite intimidating.
Yeah.
And so when I was reading through the feedback about people being fearful and stuff, I'm not saying it was because but I'm putting all these pieces together, just going, well, empathy, social cues,
I definitely need to do better in empathy, 100%. And it's kind of one of the learnings as well that I've been so focused that I was like, well, don't need any empathy because it just takes up mental capital that needs to be determined, resilient, driving forward, hitting this objective, going for the next goal. And I think some of the issues we've had in the past has been because of that. And this whole thing is a learning, this whole thing is a journey. And I think I've reflected and learned more than I have in my entire life over the last 12 months, which I think we had to do inside the feedback. And one of the things I'm definitely working on at the moment is how can I be more empathetic as a leader? And I think that'll make me a better leader long term.
Did you never get that feedback before that article came out? And that article came out last year, right?
I think I got it, but I just chose, I did what I did with a lot of feedback, which was chose to ignore it and just keep going. So it's only when you stop and pause and reflect a little bit that you look at feedback in a slightly different way.
All of this is painful.
Yeah.
This whole process is painful. The letter that came out from Punks with Purpose, the BBC stuff, all of it's painful. But there is a silver lining. I'm sure, because there's always a silver lining. What is the silver lining?
The silver lining is that the kind of last 12 months is a phenomenal opportunity for us as a business, us as an employer, me as a person, me as a leader to get better. And I think we'll look back in a few years' time, and as tough as it's been, we'll be grateful that we received that feedback and we took that time to pause, reflect, and learn and make changes. We've made more changes in the last 12 months than we've perhaps done in the history of the company. I've made more changes in my own leadership style than I have in the kind of history of the company in the last 12 months as well. So I think the silver lining is, as tough as this is an opportunity for us to double down on what we value as a company, for us to work closer with the fantastic team members that we've got all over the planet, and for us to build something together with them where they're incentivized, engaged, rewarded, motivated, played a key part in the decisions and how we're building things as well. And as tough as it's been and as hard as it's been, and it's been hard, I think we are better long-term because of that. And that's what we're focused on doing.
Anxiety. Interesting topic I talk about a lot on here. I've experienced it myself. My anxiety has been worse and hardest to control or diffuse with media-related things.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
So tell me about your experience with anxiety and when it's been hardest, and give me an honest view of what, when I use the word hard, what that looks like practically for you.
Well, kind of going through the last few years, I've had hypervigilance, I've had anxiety, just when you're constantly on alert. Yeah. So you're kind of
fight or flight extreme.
jammed in kind of fight or flight. And it's just been like, from a business perspective, it's been really tough. From a personal perspective, it's been tough as well. So that's been a challenge. And it just, when you feel like you're under attack, and like we felt like we've been under siege for large parts the last couple of years. And some of that has been with things which are untrue as well, which just kind of makes those kind of blows kind of land tougher. So you just kind of feel your body kind of convulsing with the cortisol, and you just feel yourself getting an edge. And when you're in that state, I've got to get myself back in even keel, because I don't make my best decisions. I'm not the best leader at that time. So how can I calm myself down? I work in a few breathing exercises.
Breathwork, that all one.
Breathwork is really good. So I usually do a daily breathwork practice, which I think is really key as well. And I think overall as a society, we're trending towards being more anxious. And I think our relationship with social media, our relationship with technology, which is why monitoring how many minutes I spend on my phone each day is very, very important. But I think the amount of anxiety we're seeing in a society today is so much higher than it would have been 10, 20 years ago. And as a company, going through these challenging times as well, we've put in mental health first aiders who go on a mental health first aid course. We've got a huge amount across the business as well. So
it's 90 odd it.
Yeah, 90 across our business. So starting to speak about it far more as a business. And I just think with lockdown, with COVID, with everything, like the impact on people's mental health. And I'm glad people are talking about it more. It is a challenge. And I think the more people talk about it, there's less of a stigma. And there's kind of more openness about, okay, these things help with the mental health side of things.
Did you used to think, like I did, that CEOs weren't meant to talk about it?
Yeah, but I mean, that quote that I shared with you, it's like the first rule of CEO psychological meltdown is not to speak about CEO psychological meltdown. Don't let people know it's tough. Don't let people know it's difficult. Suck it up, buttercup, and just get on with it, which works for a certain amount of time. It's definitely got a shelf life on it as well as a philosophy.
COVID was one of those moments where that really flipped, where in fact the way that you brought people along with you was by letting, I saw this really big shift in letting them know that you were feeling it too. And in fact, one of the most trust building things for teams was to turn to your team and go, listen, this is really tough and I'm scared and it's difficult for me and I'm feeling it too. And I think that was a critical moment where I learned the importance of transparency with my team, not just business transparency, but personal transparency and how useful that was in letting them know that we're in this together, I guess, as well. So it's nice to hear you say that, because to talk about your own struggles with that.
Yeah.
Have you ever been to therapy or had any sort of medical support?
Yeah, I go to therapy.
Yeah, awesome.
I do.
When did you start?
I actually started when I separated from my ex-wife.
Right.
To kind of help us through that transition, help us be the best co-parents we could to our two amazing little daughters through that. And I've continued going because I just think it's really useful. And just kind of back to being a CEO is lonely. And the tendency is, okay, let's just bottle all this stuff and let's keep going with it. I think I can be a better leader if I've got someone to talk to about those things. A way to work through the difficult, challenging emotions means that I can take the best version of myself to work every single day, be the best leader I can, and I owe it to my team to be the best leader I can be.
What has therapy done for you in terms of, so that's the sounding board component, but is there like practical sort of mechanisms or advice that you've garnered from therapy, or just an understanding of yourself, I guess, more than anything?
I think it's just an understanding of myself. So I actually did last year 5 days of intensive therapy in the woods outside of Nashville. So I was living in a little hut for 5 days and kind of doing a intensive course. And I think it's so useful, and urge everyone to do that. But the more you can understand how you're put together as a human, and so much of that is like the things that happen in your early life, how that informs the filters you use to see the world, means you can understand your behavior, and means you can avoid default patterns which are not helping you. So I would have default patterns which I would just fall into subconsciously, which didn't help me. So now I understand, okay, I think this way because these things happen. This is how I view the world usually. This is how I can put a better perspective on it. This is how I can then react better in certain situations as opposed to falling into default patterns, which maybe didn't help me.
A busy person like you, what inspired you to go and take 5 days out of your very focused, very relentless lifestyle and go and sit in a forest with a therapist?
Two very simple reasons. I want to be the best dad that I can to my two amazing little daughters. And I want to be the best leader I can to the amazing people that work in the business. And I felt, okay, the more I can understand myself, the better I can do in those two things. So I did it as much for my daughters and my team as I did it for myself. That's why I did it.
When we look ahead at your future with Brewdog and yourself, lots of grand plans. The business is growing exceptionally quick in the US. There's some pretty startling stats about the meteoric rise of Brewdog across the United States. You're opening this massive, you shut down Las Vegas Strip the other day.
We did,
Craning something in?
Yes, it was the sign for the top of the building.
Okay, that's really ridiculous. But the growth in the US has been crazy, crazy, crazy. You've told me about where you want to get to in terms of the industry, but like on a practical level, what is next for Brewdog? What should I expect as someone looking in from the outside?
You should expect us to focus even more in the three most important things in our business, and that is sustainability, that is people, and that is beer.
So tell me about that sustainability point, because you are the first carbon negative beer business in the world.
Yes. So we thought we were doing our bit for the planet. We thought we were doing our bit for sustainability. And I was fortunate enough to have dinner with Sir David Attenborough. It was just before lockdown. It was in February of 2020. And I was just hit with a blindingly stark realization. We are not doing nearly enough, and we're a part of the problem. And the problem is way more severe than I thought the problem was. So after we'd stabilized our business in the middle of a pandemic, we completely pivoted and we thought, okay, we're going to put everything on the line for what we believe in here. So we found an amazing expert. We worked hand in hand with Professor Mike Berners-Lee, one of the world's best sustainability experts, and he's been our lead scientific advisor ever since. And I think it's so important to do that. And we would have made so many mistakes in our sustainability journey if we hadn't had his help. But we decided, even though it's the middle of a pandemic, from a sustainability perspective, huge changes needed today. Not in 2040, not in 2050, not in 2030. Huge changes needed today. And we want to hopefully set a new standard when it comes to sustainability. So we became the world's first carbon negative beer business. That means we take twice as much carbon out of the air every single year that we emit. That includes all the carbon in our supply chain. We publish a report every 6 months. It's fully transparent. This is the carbon footprint of our business. This is how it's broken down. And this is how we've then helped take that carbon out of the air. We've made huge investments across our business in becoming more sustainable. We recently invested 12 million in a bioenergy facility that came online last week in Ellen. And this is amazing. So it takes our wastewater and it turns our wastewater into water we can use again, and biomethane, green gas that we can use to power our system. So our system is now fully powered by green gas that comes from our waste, also reduces our water usage. And then we're also able to use that green gas to use in vehicles, which transport our beer as well, which we're moving into. So huge investments to reduce our footprint. But we also wanted to take ownership of the problem ourselves. So our carbon is our problem. Let's do something ourselves. So we bought 9,500 acres in the Scottish Highlands, a huge chunk of land where we are creating the lost forest. So we're planting millions of trees to create this beautiful native broadleaf woodland and habitat, rewild a huge part of Scotland, restore peatlands that's going to help take carbon out of the air. And we're causing this carbon to go into the air ourselves. So we wanted to be responsible for taking it out. And it's been a crazy journey over the last couple of years. We've changed everything about our business. We've put our money where our heart is in this one. It's a huge gamble, but we fully believe that the only way we're going to get out of the climate crisis we're in at the moment is businesses. So we think governments and politicians are incapable of making the change that needs to be made because the timescales they work on is just too long for the pain that we need to take short term. So to get us out of the climate crisis, I think it's the best businesses working hand in hand with scientists to put things in place. And I think when it comes to members of the public as well, they can almost have more of an impact when it comes to sustainability with how they spend their money than how they vote. So it's making sure that our community are engaged and excited and come on this sustainability journey with us. But the 3 pillars of our business for today and going forward, sustainability, looking after people the best we can, and making the best beers that we can.
One of the allegations obviously was about the lost forest in the BBC report.
Yeah.
It took some time. It was.
Yeah.
They said that it was taking too long. Essentially, it was publicised, but then a couple of years later, it hadn't been built yet. So just to give you a chance to respond to that.
Yeah, and I think that's typical of how disingenuous some of the BBC's claims were. The single reason we hadn't started planting trees is we hadn't received the consent that we needed to start planting trees. So we had to do environmental studies. We had to apply for permission to the Scottish Forestry Commission. We were given that planning consent last week. We're starting planting in August.
Exciting. You've built a tremendous business in terms of scale and product, and your customers love what you do. And you've built that cult in your customer base. One of the pieces of advice you gave, I believe it was in your book, which I thought was really underrated, was about finance. And I sit there in the den and I reflect on how I fucked up many times in my own business. And I think, I just wish someone had said that to me when I was 20 years old, your point about finance. To quote you directly, because I wrote it down, you said, here goes, this is the single most important piece of advice in this book, an understanding of finance, essentially. Why is that through all your experience, why did you choose that as the single most important piece of advice? And tell me your journey with finance.
It's the least fun, it's the least interesting, it's perhaps the least sexy bit of your business when you've got a startup. So therefore it's the most likely to be ignored. But for me, finance is the language of business. It's the scorekeeping system of business. So if you can't keep score, how do you know how your business is doing? And it's something that so many small business owners, entrepreneurs just ignore. And that is the seed of their downfall. And like everything else, when we set up the business, I mean, we like to think we're punk in that we've got the same DIY approach. So we had to learn the skills we needed to exist outside the system to be able to beat the system. Learn the skills you need to succeed yourself so you can be self-supporting and you don't have to depend on anyone for anything, which is really important when you're a startup. So it was just self-taught, but we had to self-teach ourselves how to generate barcodes, how to do the paperwork for international customs, for shipping beer to America, how to set up an online accounting platform for the business. We had no money at all. Like outsourcing any of these things simply wasn't an option when you've got £200 in the bank account. So for the first 8 or 9 years of the business, we were teetering on the edge of financial oblivion almost every single day. And my view was, if we're not, then we're not pushing the resources we have hard enough, because we've got to be pushing and we've got to be stretching. But it also means you've got to be very considered with how you use your money, with what you're investing. Can we find a way to do this cheaper, faster, better? Can we do this ourselves? If so, let's do it ourselves and not spend that money.
There's a really important lesson in that, which I also learned, which was when you're broke, you're forced, especially the social chain was born out of me being broke at my first startup and realizing that I could no longer pay for conventional ads in a newspaper and that I was going to have to think of something else because I was forced to. In your situation, you were forced to learn finance and the fundamentals of business, and you were forced to make your marketing dollar go further with more radical, unconventional ideas. And it's funny that that's actually been a tremendous blessing. There's a lesson in that for teams in business about how to break through, disrupt, and also how to just develop yourself as an entrepreneur.
Absolutely. And that comes back to a key fundamental part of our approach, which is love a constraint. So most people look at a constraint and see it as a limiting factor. If you do that, you've lost the game before you even start. You've got to look at a constraint as a potentially beautiful catalytic force that allows you to find a better way to do something. So our business has all been about constraints, but our philosophy with a constraint is, okay, well, we can't do this a normal way. How can we find a better way, a new way to do that? And that's where Equity Punks came from. That's where giving away our beer recipes came from. That's where learning the skills that we needed to succeed ourselves and doing so many things in-house came from. It's by looking at a constraint and using that, okay, this constraint is here, let's make it beautiful, by using it as a tool to force us to think differently, to come at this from a different angle, and to hopefully find a better way to do something.
And you've said in your book and multiple times that you don't advise young startups to outsource things to agencies, even if they have the cash.
Yeah.
Because of that very reason.
Yeah.
We talk about this a lot in the den, so it's really front of mind for me at the moment, because all these businesses are walking into the den and saying, I want your 50K, Steve, because I'm going to give it to a marketing agency. And I sit in my chair and I go, fuck.
I'm going to keep the money in my pocket, thanks.
That's for me, I'm out if you say that. I always give them the advice and tell them why. I go, because when you're super early in the business, and I'm sure this is similar to your rationale, super early in the business, you want to be as close to the data as possible and the insights and the know-how and the knowledge. And what's going to happen when they spend the 50K and it didn't work, they'll blame the product and you. They will never take credit for the shit show. And of course, they're incentivized to oversell all of these products. But to get your take on that, why do you not outsource things when you're in that early? Even if you had the cash, why shouldn't I outsource things?
So our view was, even if we outsource things from early, the partner's never going to care as much as you care. They're not going to know your business, your customer, as much as you do. They're not going to be fully aligned in terms of incentives with what you're trying to do. So also, back to that philosophy of, would or could another company do this? If you outsource things, you're going to get solutions, you're going to get answers that other companies would do. So the more of that you can do internally, still use partners for execution, for reach, for bits and pieces. But with us, the more that we can do, generate internally, it's going to be our tone of voice, it's going to be our mission, it's going to be our passion. And we think that makes it more authentic. And we think that means it's going to resonate better with customers, which a lot of our marketing has done in the past. You
probably know we have a closing tradition on this podcast where the last guest asks a question for the next guest.
Yeah.
This person has written you a question, which I've not read yet, and they don't have great handwriting. So I think that says do. Do you think your younger self would be proud / look up to you now? ?
Ooh, good question. We're going deep. I thought we were like finished with the deep questions.
You've listened before. Do you think your younger self would be proud / look up to you now?
I think so, yes. I do. And like maybe even more demons when I was younger. So to kind of see that I've been able to build something and achieve something, and see that I've got lucky enough to have 2 fantastic, amazing little daughters and stuff. So I think my younger self would be happy and proud of what I've done.
Thank you. It's not easy coming here and doing this. It's not, is it? It's not easy.
It's intense.
Yeah. But intense. It is what it is. And thank you for all of that. And I hope you've enjoyed it. Quick one. As you might know, Crafted are one of the sponsors of this podcast, and they make really meaningful pieces of jewelry. This lion piece they've made, I wear all the time, along with the little timepiece, the sand timer that I wear often. And the lion piece, you might have seen Conor McGregor has a similar piece, which was custom made for him. For me, it represents courage. And if you walk through my house, the house that I'm in right now, if you walk 6 feet in that direction, you'll see a huge lion portrait. If you go upstairs, you'll see a lion portrait. If you look behind me on the shelf, near the top there, you'll see a lion as well. The reason my house and my life is surrounded by lions is because they represent courage, calmness and that tenacity that I've applied to my business success, to my professional life, and to everything in between. For me, the lion has always been an animal that can be almost a bit of a contradiction. They are so loving and so caring of their own, and can be powerful and courageous when necessary in order to achieve what they want to achieve. So if you, like me, are a big fan of courage, bravery, ambition, while also being calm and composed, check out this lion piece and let me know if you get it. My girlfriend came upstairs yesterday when I was having a shower, and she said to me that she tried the Huel protein shake, which lives on my fridge over there. And she said, it's amazing. Low calories, you get your 20 odd grams of protein, you get your 26 vitamins and minerals, and it's nutritionally complete. In the protein space, there's lots of things, but it's hard to find something that is nice, especially when consumed just with water, and that is nutritionally complete, and that has about 100 calories in total, while also giving you your 20 grams of protein. If you haven't tried the Huel protein product, do give it a try. The salted caramel one, if you put some ice cubes in it and you put it in a blender and you try it, is as good as pretty much any milkshake on the market, just mixed with water. It's been a game changer for me because I'm trying to drop my calorie intake and I'm trying to be a little bit more healthy with my diet. So this is where Huel fits in my life. Thank you, Huel, for making a product that I actually like. The salted caramel is my favorite. I've got the banana one here, which is the one my girlfriend likes, but for me, salted caramel is the one.